Hey, welcome, folks. It appears we are live. Welcome to the Theros Beyond Death set review. This is going to be a review where we will rank the cards, and then you, the audience, can also rank them. We can kind of compare and contrast the two. It should be fun. It should be fun. It should be a good time. Joining me now is the great Wyatt Darby, fellow member of Team Tempo Storm and Pro Tour champion. You can find him at twitch.tv/Wyatt Darby MTG. How are you doing, Wyatt?
I'm doing well, Caleb. Absolutely like chomping at the bit for Theros to come out on Arena in what is it on Thursday now. So we're kind of in the home stretch, and I'm excited to kind of just break things down, give players a good chance to get an idea of where kind of we think they should be starting in Standard and some of the best build arounds that we'll be seeing.
Yeah, the hype is real. The hype is real. It's real, I say.
Yeah, and I think that's it's really cool. We have a lot of a mix of a couple different things. You know, we have a lot of the marquee Theros mechanics coming back. You know, we're getting kind of traditional style gods and devotion, and that's really exciting because you can't just like slide those things in a decks that already exist. It kind of means that if these cards are good, we're going to be having completely new decks from what we've seen in Standard. And you know, Standard's been solid, but it's been a lot of fires and cat food and stuff like that. So I'm ready to kind of change it up and really throw some new pillars into the ring.
Yeah, and devotion in particular seems like a mechanic that might bring some older cards that haven't like had their chance to shine in Standard yet. It might make them suddenly much better, right? We saw like a cycle of uncommons in the last set where they all had double cost and the double color requirements and the casting cost, and those all play very well with devotion, which of course cares about how many colored pips you have in play. So if you have a creature in play that costs black, that's going to count towards devotion, and then Grey Merchant, when it comes into play, it's going to count its own devotion, which is black on top of the other creatures. And now suddenly you're draining for 4, and it just builds very nicely like that. So a lot of cards that wouldn't have been necessarily powerful enough for Standard before and haven't had this huge impact might suddenly become format staples due to this mechanic coming back. It's exciting. It's sweet.
Yeah, and what makes what we're doing today so unique too is it's not just us talking about what we think of the cards. Twitch chat is going to have an opportunity to vote on a rating for each card as we're talking about it, and yeah, we do get to compare and contrast that. And it's really nice to see different perspectives too, because I don't know about you, but I'm really used to looking at cards in a particular way. Like this needs to do something when it comes into play, or it needs to be cheap and efficient. But sometimes kind of the big bomby splashy cards end up breaking into Standard too with just cool combinations. I always think of like Fires of Invention and Red Cavalier, like kind of as a spike. I don't think I would have seen that myself until someone else with a maybe more brew-minded focus kind of stumbled upon it.
Oh yeah. A lot of times I don't really fully appreciate how good a card or a pairing of cards is until someone is murdering me with it on the battlefield. I'm like, oh, that's better than I thought it was. Okay, all right. But these early set reviews are especially nice to kind of like contrast your own initial reactions, your own evaluations of the cards against other people's, and that'll give you a little bit of a edge going forward into your own brews into the new format. See what you want to might bring to F&M in the next few weeks, and then it also gives you an edge in the pre-release, right? Like maybe you have a better idea of what cards you want to trade for, that sort of thing. Sweet.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing that, if you open, say, Elspeth in a pre-release, like, all right, yeah, Wyatt and Caleb says this card's good, I'll give it a shot. I'm not, so stuff like that. And speaking of Elspeth, it looks like White is going to be our first setup. So why don't we get to it and start breaking down some cards here today, shall we?
Theros Beyond Death. White. Let's see our first card. First card of the set review. Bam! Archon of Sun's Grace. 2 white for a 3/4 flying lifelink. Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. And Constellation. Constellation is whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. That's going to trigger the Constellation each time. It's an older mechanic. It's coming back. People that are familiar with Theros from before are going to recognize it. But in this case, the triggered ability is going to be to create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying.
Yeah, kind of an interesting design. I look at this card and it looks a little bit finicky at first, but a giant lifelinker that continues to spit out other lifelinkers actually seems like, at the very least, a pretty powerful sideboard option to have against the aggro decks in the format. Especially considering that most of the removal those aggro decks play, stuff like maybe Bone Crusher Giant or the like, doesn't quite hit a creature with 4 toughness.
We've seen some pretty bad flying lifelinkers see play in like block sideboards. And then we've seen some very good ones like Baneslayer Angel have like a huge impact on standard formats. This one seems like it's like kind of in between the two, right? Where you've got a where you've it's 4 mana for a 3/4 flying lifelink. Those are pretty reasonable stats. It's not going to dominate the air, right? Like other flyers are going to probably be larger if they're seeing play in standard. There's a good chance that there's going to be larger flyers out there, but the constellation ability, if you can trigger that even just once, then already I think the stats are pretty good on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about, I think, with Archon of Sun's Grace, is trying to pair it with kind of cheap constellation cards. Because if you could ever get to the mid game and play Archon and make it 2/2 immediately, then you're looking at something that's more, closer to like a 5 mana 5/6 flying lifelink package, and that's where you're really starting to talk. That is not quite Bane Slayer territory, but it's getting pretty close. So I look at this card and I think kind of a common thing that I'm going to be saying in this stream, I think, is I see like a solid Doom Foretold sideboard card. That's a deck that had problems with aggro for a while, and naturally is going to have a lot of enchantments built in. So I think Archon of Sun's Grace is going to be a role player. I would probably rate it somewhere about like a 2 out of 5. It's a card that is going to have some applications, but will never really like dominate the format, I don't think.
Okay, and we should explain our evaluations a little bit before we get too far in here. I see a 1 as stone unplayable. It's 1 to 5. There's no zeros in this. There are no zeros in our set review. Every card deserves at least a pip, at least a 1. So a 1's unplayable. 2 is like niche play, like sideboard, like Darby was just talking about. 3 I think is like a solid playable. 4 is going to be a card that's popular in standard. It's going to see a 4 of play in a lot of decks. It's not going to necessarily dominate the format, but it's going to be a solid role player. And then 5 is going to be a card that not only sees play in standard, but probably like bleeds into other formats because it's so powerful. So like a multi-format all-star. Anyway, that's our rating system. Darby thinks that Archon of Sun's Grace is a mere 2, merely going to see niche sideboard play. I think I'm going to give it slightly more than that. I think this is a playable. As always, whenever you're dealing with a card's playability, there needs to be a home for it. So a lot of its playability is going to depend on how good Constellation is, like whether the Constellation deck was going to have a need for an efficient flyer that gains life, helps race, and spits out 2/2s. But yeah, if it does, this one's going to be quite good at that. All right. Next card. I'm shouting at like someone else is going to move it, but I'm actually in control of it. So next card, me. Yeah, the Pegasus token. This is what it sputs out. This is Pegasus. That's sweet. That's sweet art though.
Yeah, I think it's always, I don't know. It's cool to get new tokens. I don't think we have one of these yet, and I don't know. Like, I kind of like the new border, the new frame on these. I guess it's been a set or two since they've been out, but solid token.
So cool. Yeah. Eidolon of Obstruction, 1 and a white for a 2/1 first strike. Note that it's an enchantment creature spirit, so we'll be triggering Constellation. Will work well in enchantment synergy shells. First strike, and then another static ability. Loyal abilities of planeswalkers your opponents control cost 1 more to activate. What do you think, Darby?
I think this is really cool design space. There's been a lot of clamor about white sort of losing its identity in recent sets, and I think one of the quintessential white things for me is taxing. Making your opponent's spells abilities cost more, and this leans into that really nicely. I think we've seen a standard format that's, since Oko's left, hasn't been really planeswalker dominated. So it's not like we really need this tax. But I look at this card, I see a solid attacker. It scales well with pump abilities with first strike, and white decks were kind of wanting extra 2 drops anyway. Atomic was okay. Tide Taker was situational, but all right. So it's possible that Eidolon of Obstruction, just kind of like with the first strike and the pretty solid ability, could just slot into that 2-drop spot in just white aggressive shells.
I agree with everything that you just said. What amazing commentary. No, seriously, I think if there's a white aggressive deck in the format, then this card's going to see a lot of play because it'll probably want to play this card. I think it's good enough in a white aggressive shell, which would make it like a 4 because it would be like super popular in standard and stuff. And then if there isn't such a shell, like say White Weenie is unplayable in this format, then it slinks down to a 2 because then it's like just more of like a niche role player. So it's going to depend on if it's got a home, but I do think the card is good enough.
Yeah, and one thing to note when you're testing Eidolon in sort of your early brews in the format, one thing about it that's kind of cool is a card that you can't always tell how much it's impacting your opponent when you have Eidolon in play, because they might have a Teferi Time Ravel in their hand they want to cast, but because they can't activate its ability right away, it might just be played and died. So it might just seem like your opponent's operating completely fine, but their options could be kind of hidden and constrained in a way that's not obvious. So if you're playing in paper against friends, make sure to double check after the game. Like, hey, was this Eidolon actually seriously messing up? Because sometimes these Taxes cards can kind of be hard to tell in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and otherwise though, I think this one is it's solid. I think if I had to rate it, kind of the rating on Eidolon is kind of a confidence, how much confidence you have in White Beatdown being kind of good post Theros. I think I would probably put it around a 3, because there could be some metagames where maybe Simic Flash pops up and you might want a little bit more Tide Taker over Eidolon, but I think it's going to be a solid 3. Like, it's going to have its moments. It's just always going to be okay in aggro mirrors because of the first strike. So I think there's a solid floor on this one.
For sure, and that's pretty much what I give it to, right? I give it the 2 to 4 range. 3 is right in the middle there. It just makes sense. All right, next card. Elspeth Conquers Death, 3 white saga. This is our first saga of the review, and it is a spicy one. First level. So if you're not familiar with sagas, the way that they work is it says that they're in the italics as it enters play, and after your draw step, add a lore counter, sacrifice after 3. So the first time you play Elspeth, the first turn that it comes into play, it is going to do something. It's going to be at the first stage. It's going to exile in a permanent that opponent controls with permanent mana cost 3 or greater. It's not any permanent, but it will exile a good one, right? Usually the good ones cost 3 or greater. And by the time you're playing this on turn 5, at the earliest, your opponent's probably going to have something worth exiling in play. The second ability is non-creature spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more to cast until your next turn. So the turn after you play this Elspeth, that's going to trigger, going to ideally hinder the opponent a little bit. And then the third one is return target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on it or a loyalty counter on it.
Yeah, pretty interesting card design. This one actually really reminds me of the Eldritch Reborn, a pretty similar saga from Dominaria, and I kind of like it. It's the first side is solid, flexible interaction. Permanents that cost 3 or more mana hits a lot of the cornerstones of Standard. You can go anywhere from like Rotting Regisaur, Embercleave, if you're not dead to either of those cards already, or you can hit any of the sacrifice creatures, Fires of Invention. So that's pretty solid. I think the hard part to evaluate is how much this middle chapter is going to do. Making your opponents not just all spells, but non-creature spells cost a little bit more. It kind of seems to me that ability might not be impactful enough as you're getting towards that final chapter to make this card, see all that much play.
Yeah. I like the comparison to Eldritch Reborn. Eldritch Reborn, of course, which was just like a straight up gassy card in Standard, right? It saw like it didn't always see play. It like kind of depended on how good the Edict effect was. It was really good against opposing planeswalkers because they usually only have like the one planeswalker in play, right? And then you'd get the for sure card advantage when they like discarded a card, and then you would be able to actually grab their planeswalker out of the graveyard with the last ability on that one. So that was pretty messed up. I think this card is slightly less good. I don't think it's quite as good just because it can't get a planeswalker or creature from the opponent's graveyard. But exiling a card is a lot better than an edict. It's much better than an edict. Being able to point to your opponent's best card and be like, that one's gone, and as opposed to them being like, I'll just sack my worst thing. It's a little bit harder for them to play around when you get to choose the target. That said, I think the second ability is worse. There are times when the second ability is going to be much better, but I think overall it's worse because it's not card advantage. Yeah.
I guess some things to look at that is going to make this one different than Eldritch Reborn is the set context. This has 2 white devotion that it can add if that's something that you're interested in, and it is going to be able to trigger Constellation, or if you have any permanent matters cards, if you have any enchantment matters cards, Elspeth Conquers Death is going to check both of those boxes too. So it's kind of evaluating how those are going to maybe push this over the top is going to be hard, because it's a lot of one of those things where it seems like to get the enchantment matters stuff really playing well, you have to kind of stack a lot of redundant payoffs on top of each other, and it's kind of unclear if we have enough of that.
That's fair. I do like how you said though it does work well with the mechanics in the set, and that usually tends to push a card forward because Wizards usually wants their newer mechanics to make an impact. It's pretty rare that they're like, yeah, we printed these new cards, and we're like hoping that they don't do anything in the standard form, right? They want to shift things up a little bit. They want to get people excited about the new cards. So with that in mind, it's probably costed with Constellation and Devotion in mind. It's probably going to be somewhat good in those archetypes. I'm gonna hedge high. I'm gonna hedge high with this one. I think it's boring if we just rate everything a 3. I'm gonna give it a 4.
Oh damn! All right.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
that's right. That's
I
right.
think
I'm taking a
for me this
stand.
one is I think I'm gonna be classic pessimistic Darby and probably say 2.5.
Two
It
and a
can be very
half.
powerful, but I think it's just a little bit too situational for me to get really on board with.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I think the exile is great, and then you do need to be playing a deck that is going to be able to take advantage of the third ability. But I don't think that's even that hard. It doesn't even need to be in the graveyard by the time you play the Elspeth, right? Like something could die after that, and
Yeah,
it's
I
also
guess
making
that's
it a little bit better.
we could consider that like people have been talking about doing kind of reanimation style decks in standard for kind of a little while now. Ever since we had like I think the last core set, and we had what is it, Agent of Treachery and Drakaseth, like some really really splashy 7 drops introduced. So this could be another way to take advantage of this enchantment here. Is just kind of putting it in your deck as flexible, interaction slash reanimation. I'm not sure if there's a ton of that available on white, but it is a
Right.
pretty powerful card if you can really lean into that final ability.
Yeah, devotion decks are going to want to be stuffed full of creatures and planeswalkers. Unless one cares about those. And then yeah, the self mill decks, the escape decks are also doing a lot of that as well, filling up the graveyard with creatures and whatnot. So we'll see. We shall see. All right. There is a community vote ready for this one. We'll see. We'll
Ooh,
see where they end up here. You need rating 2. Two
2.
out
All
of
right.
5. You're all crazy. Next card. Heliod's Intervention. X white white instant. Choose one, destroy X target artifacts and or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life.
Yeah, so
Darby, what
this
do you
is
think?
the first of the intervention cycle. We're going to have one of these for all the colors. And I think Helion's intervention kind of, I looked at this like, wow, that's just a really nice sideboard card. There's a lot of decks in standard right now that are going to care about either artifacts or enchantments. And, we're coming into a set where I don't know exactly what the percentages of cards that are enchantments, but I bet we're getting like 30% of Theros is going to be killable by this card. So this strikes me as something that is it's gonna wax and wane on how good it is according to the betting game. But I feel like if I'm playing a white deck in standard, I it'd be hard to imagine me not playing at least like 2 of these in my 75 cards.
Sure, yeah. I think anytime you end up with a dirtily situational X spell, you gotta think about like what types of archetypes can actually play this. And it's not gonna show up in like a white weenie style deck, main deck, right? Like it's not gonna be there. It doesn't kill the opponent. The target player gains twice X life. It's probably not gonna be useful in that style of deck. Um, the exception to that is if artifacts and enchantments start dominating the format, right? And the constellation deck is the deck to beat, and then all of a sudden, maybe you start maybe you start playing 1 or 2 copies of this in the main deck because if you draw it in the right matchup, it's just going to destroy, right? It's just going to be like, well, you had this overwhelming board state, and now that's gone, and now I get to win. More likely, this is going to show up in dirtly style control decks that can really take advantage of the X, where you hit all your land drops until turn infinity, and then it can be a game swinger in multiple types of matchups. Like that's the style of deck where the target player gains twice X life, where that can actually come up if you're facing a burn strategy. It's some deck with a lot of reach, maybe a deck with a lot of gray merchants that's trying to grind down your life total without even necessarily attacking. Maybe it'll be better to be able to gain like X is 5. That's like 10 life later on, late game. It's not crazy, not hard for a control deck to hit. And that could be a sideboard card, or if it's like high impact enough, if you're drawing enough cards, I could also see that sliding into those dirtly control decks, main decks. But because it'll probably be a sideboard card, I'm gonna give it a 2. But a really really good one.
Yeah, and
It's
I
a
think with this card, it's kind of interesting to me is I wonder if it's going to allow control decks like blue, white, and Esper Control to not play planar cleansing anymore. Because I felt like a lot of the reason that those decks were leaning into the powerful destroy all permanents sweeper was because they just had a hard enough time killing the Trail of Crumbs and Witch's Oven type cards of the world. So intervention could change that. And it's yeah, I think basically 2 is exactly where I would put it, but it's like a strong 2. Like I'm confident that this card is going to be. It is a little bit niche, I think, but it is, I think, about as powerful as a niche card can be when those situations do come up. So I think I agree right on the nose with the 2.
A strong 2 from us. Do we have a community vote on this one? Ooh, also a 2.
2.
We all agree.
Everyone's in agreement.
Agree. Next card, Idyllic Tutor. 2 and a white, sorcery, search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. You are loved, child. So this is a reprint. This one has seen printing into standard before, where it didn't really do much. It wasn't some huge playable. Every once in a while, you see it in like a brew, like a deck that's like specifically trying to put together some enchantment combo. Enchantment-based EDH decks are playing this. But yeah, 3 mana for a tutor, and like a very situational tutor is a little tough to swallow. Usually standard is more hyper efficient than that. You usually want a little bit more out of a 3 mana spell.
Yeah, I agree that it has a lot of problems. Idyllic Tutor does, but I think one thing that actually lets you kind of off the hook for spending 3 mana on a card that doesn't impact the board is if you go grab Fires of Invention and then play Fires along with a free 4 mana spell the following turn. I think Tutor is definitely a card that I'm going to try out a lot in the Fire shell, and also there's a chance that I might want to do a little bit of it in Doom Foretold too. It gets you the namesake card, and you do have a lot of flexibility. Like the deck is just going to be full of permanents that Idyllic Tutor can pick up. So I think it's in most standard environments, I don't think it would be that good, but I just see a lot of really interesting shells and opportunities showing up in Theros Standard.
The Fire's Point is interesting. Because if you untap, then you like tutor, and also play the enchantment that you're tutoring for with Fires, and then of course you mentioned that it fetches the Fires itself. I'm sticking by my rating. I already locked it in. No changes.
Yeah, I think.
What do you put it at? What number are you giving?
I think it's going to be a 3. Like I think that Idyllic Tutor is going to be a card that really accentuates existing decks and might even, have some new shells crop up around its flexibility. So I think that this one is going to be able to overcome the 3 mana no board impacts and actually really see some standard play.
Good points. Do we have a community rating? 2. Directly in between us. Next card. Shatter the Sky. 2 white, sorcery. Each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, then destroy all creatures. Darby, what do you think?
I'm actually kind of interested in the card. It's gonna hedge a lot based on what type of creature decks people are playing. In standard right now, kind of the premier aggro deck is Red Black Knights, and that's a strategy that actually has very few creatures that are power 4 or greater. They're much more of like a grow wide Swarm archetype. So against a deck like that, having a kill everything on 4 mana is huge. And even if you're playing against a bigger creature deck, Shadow the Sky giving your opponent a card back might turn your 4 for 1 into a 4 for 2, which is still I think a really solid exchange. And for board clear effects, I think being 4 mana or less is the name of the game. Like, just if you have to wait till turn 5, there's a solid chance you're dead. So I think Shadow the Sky is going to be a really nice pickup for decks that just can't cast Kaya's Wrath. I think is really what it's going to slot in.
Okay. I saw this one get played a little bit in the team series final that happened on Sunday, and there were 2 in John Finkel's deck, and he played against a green black like almost all creatures deck from Andrey Yanyuk, and there were multiple games that he cast both Shatter the Skies, and it was just not nearly good enough for 2 reasons. Every time you play it, your opponent's drawing a card, assuming they have a creature with power 4 or greater, which is naturally going to help the opponent recover a little bit if they've curved out like so. And then the other reason is escape is pretty big in this limited format. So you sweep the board and then the creatures just come back. And it's like, all right, well, I'll rebuy my things, and they're bigger now, so yay. So it didn't actually seem as bomby or like as brutal as a sweeper normally would in limited. Usually, if you play a sweeper in limited, you win the game. It's a stone bomb, really hard to come back from. Now it's possible that Shadow the Sky is going to end up seeing play in constructed, and be quite good in constructed, while also not being as dominating in limited as sweepers usually are, which would be a really interesting phenomenon, right? If we got a constructed playable sweeper that didn't destroy a limited format. Um, but I'm guessing that this sweeper is just not quite as good as sweepers tend to be, because it lets the opponent draw a card to help stabilize and such, to help
Yeah,
get their value back. I have
I
seen
definitely.
people talking about pairing it, the 3 mana Gideon, the one that has indestructible. So like you're always going to draw a card when you play Shadow the Sky. Just like turn 3 Gideon, turn 4 Shatter, draw a card, sweep the opponent's blockers out of the way, get in. Could be nice. Could be nice.
Yeah, that combo is especially sweet because Gideon can also give like one extra creature indestructible to make the blowout even more immense. So yeah, I think with Shadow of the Sky, I would probably rate it at about like a 2.5 mark. You know, it's one of those cards that I do think some decks will want a sweeper effect, but can't quite dip into the extra colors necessary to pick up, Kaya's Wrath or Deafening Clarion or Witch's Vengeance or what have you. But I don't really think that it's going to be possible to have this card be like a foundational piece of whatever strategy you're building. So I think I'm going to kind of put it right in the middle, and I guess say that I would be surprised if it dominated the format and saw no play, or saw no play, I should say.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm gonna give it a 2. I think people are gonna try it out a lot early on. I think people are gonna play this card a lot early on, and then I think they're gonna find out that they're not winning as often when they cast it as when they cast other sweepers. Is my hunch, but just a hunch, just a first impression. Could be wrong. The Gideon synergy does sound nice, so if it is gonna turn out to be like a solid role player or like a format staple, it'll probably be off the back of something like that. What does the community think? What do we got? Bam,
Ooh,
three,
three.
three. There we are. They like it a little bit more than we do.
And I think
Next
that's
card.
fair. It's just we don't get too many 4 mana sweepers in standard. Like if you
Sure.
look over the last 5 years, we've been pretty sparse in that department. So I think that even one with a bit of a drawback can still overcome the you know just that hurdle.
It's a fair point. Terranika, Ekron Veteran, 1 white legendary creature human. Vigilant. When it attacks, untap another target creature you control until end of turn. That creature has base power toughness 4/4 and gains indestructible. It's a 3/3.
Yeah, this card is actually pretty interesting to me. I think that there's a couple different ways that you want to build around this card. I think the first one is you definitely want to skew pretty heavily towards creatures that are as small as possible, so you can get the most functional increase from boosting them up to base 4/4. And also, I guess it kind of pays off, pump that comes in the form of +1/+1 counters like Venerated Loxodon or Unbreakable Formation, because that extra power you're getting doesn't conflict with the boost here. So and beyond that, double white pips matters a lot, and even just a 3/3 for 3 is kind of just big enough, I think, to kind of let this card potentially break into standard.
I think I'm with you. I think it's like if devotion matters, then this card matters. It's weird, but like for a legendary creature, it's in its power and stuff. I don't it doesn't wow me, you know. Like if this card came out back in the day, and we'd be like, oh my god, 3 mana for a 3/3 vigilance, and it pumps another creature. This is so good. And now we're just like, that's it. That's all that's going on. So I think it's a little underpowered in comparison to creatures that have been printed recently. But you make a good point about devotion. Devotion ends up mattering, then this one's gonna be quite good.
Yeah, and kind of the way I look at it is it's like a 3 mana 6 power creature that's kind of a little bit finicky to actually work. Because if you don't have a creature that you can play before this hits the battlefield, it is not good enough. Like not, you can't play a 3 mana for a 3/3 that doesn't have an impact when it comes onto the field. But if you're already curving out, let's say, you've made like a Healer's Hawk into, that Eidolon of Obstructionist, then you play Taranika, that is kind of a lot of pressure, and your opponent's going to have a bit of a hard time blocking because, it's just making your 1-drop attack for 4 really does kind of complicate a lot of things. So I think that the drawbacks are real. It's kind of the small sizing and the legendary status making it tough to put too many copies of this in your deck, or potentially awkward if you draw too many. But I actually think that Tarnika is kind of a sweet card, and I think if there's white aggro, the big thing is there's kind of a lot of competition at the 3-drop spot now, because we're going to be getting to a couple extra cards that are costing 3 powerful white things. Maybe Heliod, or heck, even Linden in conjunction with Heliod might be good. So I think that's going to be the big thing holding back this Akroan veteran.
Cougar in the chat points out that the 1/1 trampled Death Strike guy is pretty good with this one. I think that's a Boros creature. Wouldn't be the worst curve ever. Be attacking for what, 11 on turn 4.
Yeah, that's not bad. I think it's kind of I think it's a card with some solid synergy, and yeah, Swiftblade Vindicator curving into this. That's a pretty powerful start if your opponent's not doing any interaction.
What's your number? What rating are you giving it?
I think with this one, I would probably put it at a 2.5.
Pretty common rating for me, but it's 1 through 5. I'm cutting off the halves.
No halves. All right. You're gonna make me bump it down to a 2 then. I think it's just occasionally powerful, but it's gonna be hard to have this be like a premier, core component to, I think, whatever deck you're playing. And Caleb, does this get your first 1 rating of the stream, or?
No, I think niche is a good word for it. I don't think it's like unplayable. I'm gonna give it a 2.
And let's see how the community feels about this, if they're higher on it than we are. Oh, another 3. So I think that definitely we see the community recognizing some of the potential upsides. Basically the 3 power 6 drop, that's not bad. Even if it does have some weakness to interaction, or kind of failing to curve out. I think there is some power here, and this is one card that I'm really excited to kind of get into the trenches with, because if the metagame is more about people just kind of not really interacting and doing their own thing, this does present a really fast clock, and could be situationally quite good.
Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis, 2 white legendary planeswalker. Elspeth, -1 up to 2 target creatures you control each get +2/+1 until end of turn. -2, create 2 1/1 white human soldier tokens, and then the -3 is gain 5 life. Note that all of these abilities are minuses. There are no pluses. Usually planeswalkers have pluses so that they can grow and get up to an ultimate. But there's one more ability. It is Escape. This is our first escape card. 4 white, exile 4 other cards from your graveyard. Italics there. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost. So very similar to Flashback. If you've ever mucked around with Flashback before, a way to rebuy a card from your graveyard at a later point. The difference is Escape is always going to have you exiling other cards in your graveyard as well as part of the cost. So you won't be able to escape on the opponent's turn if it's not an instant, right? It's not going to change the timing restrictions on when you use an escape ability or get a card back. But sometimes it does augment what the card does. Sometimes a planeswalker will come into play with more loyalty, or a creature will come into play with 1/1 counters, or you'll get a triggered ability, something fun like that. Anyway, so the escape ability kind of helps you see why this card only has downticks, right? And like it seems like it's supposed to be like downtick, or downtick. Elspeth dies because you used up all the loyalty that way. You escape, bring it back. Note that when the turn that the Elspeth dies, if you do escape it that turn, you can actually get multiple activations per turn. So on the turn where you're looking to possibly kill your opponent, you can minus it, jump 2 creatures. Your Elspeth dies, assuming that you've managed the loyalty correctly. Pay the escape, bring it back, pump 2 more creatures. Not too shabby.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, especially because if you look at the sequencing on this card, it kind of curves into its own escape recast. You play it on turn 4, make 2 tokens on turn 4, make 2 tokens on turn 5, on turn 6, you do get to pump them, and then bring it back. And I think the thing that's making people a little bit lower on Elspeth than I think it's deserved is just like, it is kind of boggling to me that the worst ability in the card, the gain 5 life, is also the one that demands the most loyalty from Elspeth. So I kind of like to evaluate this card as primarily like, are we getting enough from the -1 and the -2? And I actually kind of think we are. It's just a lot of resiliency rolled up in one planeswalker, and it does a pretty good job of protecting itself too. Two tokens is not trivial to attack through, and the fact that those tokens are representing a fair amount of potential damage with Elspeth, pumping them up every turn after turn, even if you want to hit harder and not necessarily go wider by making two tokens in multiple turns in a row.
Yeah, I like that it's an army in a can, right? Even if you just looked at this as like a card that was just only spitting out tokens, it still wouldn't be terrible. What number are you giving it?
I think Elspeth is really powerful, and a lot of my ratings with cards that have escape are going to be skewed a little bit high because I just think that um, they just give you so much potential action as the game goes longer, especially if you're playing this on like the top end of a curve of a white weenie shell where you might lose all your creatures to a single, say, Deafening Clarion, and Elspeth can then be pretty easily cast multiple times. So I would probably put it as a 3.5. I could see it going in mid range, aggro, even being a
No
resilient control
halves.
finisher.
3 or 4.
Ah, no. Okay. All right. I guess I'm bump it up to a 4 then.
Got to have some 4s. There's got to be a few 4s in there. I agree. I've got it as a 4 as well. I also agree with what you're saying about escape, giving a lot of longevity to cards. I wasn't really sure how to evaluate escape, and then I saw it play out in limited a little bit. Limited is of course different than constructed, but value is value, right? Value is always good. Oh man, and then we get a glimpse of the soldiers that this one spits out. The community rating is in. Elspeth agrees with us, also giving it 4. People like this card. People like Elspeth. Popular planeswalker. Heliod, the Sun Crowned, 2 and a white, legendary enchantment creature, God. We got a first God here. Indestructible, cannot be destroyed. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature. Whenever you gain life, put a 1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. So you can put a +1/+1 counter on on an enchantment, I suppose, that is not a creature yet. And then 1 and a white, another target creature gains lifelink till end of turn.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit. I'm not sure how bold it is. I think Heliod's going to be my first 5 of the review, and that's for a couple different reasons. There are, even though it's a card that is really pretty pigeonholed into being, well, heavily white. There are a couple different ways to build it. I think Heliod might bring back the return of the Life Gain Matters, white beatdown, the Ajani's Pride Mate Healer's Hawk sort of strategy. You can also slow down a little bit more, get like Arcanist Owl and a more grindy devotion strategy going for Heliod. And I think what really makes it a 5 for me is the fact that it is a combo card in both, Pioneer, Modern, probably never breaking into Legacy, I would imagine, but it's going to have some, I think, pretty serious cross-format implications.
Yeah, someone pointed out in the chat that the reason you can put a one counter on a creature or enchantment is that that way it can pump itself before it turns into a creature. It's kind of nice. Then it turns on later. For people that aren't familiar with devotion, I kind of explained it earlier, but in a very poor and confusing way. If you look at the casting cost of the card, you see the little white pip. It means that your devotion to white is always going to be at least 1 when the Heliod is in play. It's going to count itself. So then you need 4 other white pips from your other permanents. So if you have 2 white knights in play, for example, you would have the 4 devotion turn this into a 5/5 indestructible. Indestructible, of course, if you play a Wrath of God. If you play a sweeper type effect, it's not going to destroy Heliod. But if you played something that made the power and toughness go down to 0, or if you played an edict effect that would hit it, it can die that way. Anyway, I agree with everything that Darby said. There is the combo with Walking Ballista that people are talking about in Pioneer. I know this review is mostly going to be focusing on Standard, and in Standard I wouldn't quite give it a 5, but one of the things that we were saying in our reviews is that the multi-format All Stars are going to be the 5s. So we're going to cheat a little bit, give it a 5 because of that. Because I do think this is going to see Pioneer play. It'll probably see Modern play as well. In Modern, you can hit it with Collected Company. But yeah, it seems like there's going to be some sweet devotion decks in Standard, and those decks will probably want this one. Seems great. Really hard to race. Community rating
Absolutely.
is also in. They also gave it a 5. Seems we are in agreement here. So boring. We need to spice things up. We need to disagree strongly, Darby. We need to play. No. Let's not play devil's advocate. We're gonna give honest reviews, honest ratings, and that's it. That's white. That's we're only covering the rares and the mythics, of course. And so overall, what do you think about white in the upcoming standard? Do you think it
Um,
gains? Do you think it loses in comparison to the other colors? We haven't touched on the other colors
yeah, I
side.
think that white is finally getting cards powerful enough to really incentivize you into committing, white as your primary color of an archetype. I think before, it was mostly just Deafening Clarion or Teferi were the white cards that you're really touching in standard. So I think Heliod is going to be a big piece that's going to change that. I think Elspeth is going to be a card that you want. So without even really getting to the other colors, I would be kind of surprised if white wasn't the most improved. It was starting low, but I still think we're going to see a lot here.
Yeah, I think Heliod has a good chance to be my only 5 in the set review. I might change my mind as we go along. There's like 1 or 2 other cards that I might consider giving it to. But if white gets the only 5, it's hard to say that it's the worst of the colors. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I had to rate how good I thought white as a color was across the cards that we looked at, I would probably say, I don't know, I would probably say 4, because even just like the role player cards have some pretty clear and powerful applications. Looking at like Eidolon of Obstruction as an example of that, or heck, even the Archon of Sun's Grace, kind of the big flying lifelinker is a card that it's worth looking at cards that if they aren't interacted with can absolutely run away with the game, and I think white has a few of those.
Although I will say, a lot of my ratings, I gave points to white cards under the assumption that like Constellation would be playable, that Constellation would be like some kind of of a a thing, or that the Devotion would be playable, that there'd be a valuable Devotion deck. A lot of the cards get a lot better. If that ends up not being the case, then there might be some duds in there, despite some strong reviews on my part. Anyway, hedging my bets a little bit. Let's move on to the next color. Why don't we? Next color is, of course, after white in the typical color order is red. That's why we're gonna. Oh no, it's blue. It's blue. Tricked you all. White, blue, black, red, green, of course. Yes, yes. How do you? What's your attachment to blue, Darby? You want a pro tour with a mono red deck, right? So,
Yeah,
so are you spiky enough to play the blue cards as well? Do you touch on everything?
I think so. I'm a lover of like mid-range piles that are at least 3 colors, so it kind of makes it hard not to dip into blue sometimes if that's the sort of thing that you like to jam. I loved some Snapcaster in Modern for the longest time, and we might be seeing more of that after the recent bannings here. So yeah, I think blue's sweet. And standard right now, my favorite blue thing to do is definitely resetting Agent of Treachery multiple times. Whether you're doing that with like
Oh
the
yeah,
fairy
you're one of
bounces or quantity
those. I
duplicates.
see.
Yeah, so I'm kind of into blue.
Stealing stuff, taking names, stealing names. First card, Ashiok's Erasure. 2 blue blue for an enchantment with flash. So it's an enchantment you can play on the opponent's turn. Plays into that theme of playing effects on the opponent's turn. That's a motif that blue has going on in this set. When Ashiok's Erasure enters the battlefield, exile target spell. So it can act like a counter spell there. Only a spell that says can't be countered can still be exiled with this, of course. So a little bit better than a normal counter spell in some cases. Second ability, your opponent can't cast spells with the same name as the exiled card, so it kind of meddling mages that card name as well. And then when it leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to the owner's hand. So the actual counterspell aspect of Ashiok's Eraser seems better than it is on Spell Queller, which is something similar. It's hard to see a new card and not compare it to old cards. For example, there's the Meddling Mage effect on the Ashiok's Eraser, and then if someone answers the Ashiok's Eraser with a disenchant effect, spell doesn't immediately go on the stack like it does with Spell Queller. It returns to the controller's hand or owner's hand. Sorry.
And I think this one's going to be a powerful option to have access to. I think that if you look at standard right now, there are a lot of decks that do very much care about having expensive stuff resolve. Nissa has spawned a whole slew of archetypes, and countering a 5 mana spell with Ashiok's Erasure, not too bad. Ditto for stuff like Fires of Invention. There are just a lot of kind of expensive marquee cards that make having a small amount of an expensive counter spell okay, especially if that counter spell turns off all of their copies of that card. So yeah, I think Erasure is going to be solid, but like I see a lot of control decks maybe just like playing 1 or 2 of this because it is a little bit too expensive to really lean into heavily.
Yeah, there's a lot of competition in the blue green flash deck for at the 4-drop slot, but this is a way to punish opponents for just stacking Shifting Ceratops, for having that be your answer to like a pile of counter spells, just like this is uncounterable. Ashiok's Erasers, like I'm gonna exile it, and all of the ones in your hand are stuck there, and you're dead. And that's gonna be me. I'm gonna be the person staring at 3 Ceratops, like not learning my lesson. Like, why? And it's gonna be very frustrating. So possibly a sideboard option for that deck to beat uncounterable spells out of the sideboard. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely seems like kind of the definition of a 2 for me. You know, very very niche card, but definitely not without purpose.
Yep. Exactly. That's what I'm gonna lock in as well.
See how the community agrees with us. Looks like, yeah. Also another 2 on this one, and I think that I think that that's not going to be. I might get put on blast for some of these ratings later, but I don't think this will be one of those cards.
Feeling confident. Nadir Kraken, 1 blue creature Kraken. Whenever you draw a card, you may one if you do. Create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. It's a 2/3. I love this card. I love the flavor of it. And you see the giant tentacles around it, and then every time you pump it, you're like getting another tentacle. You know, it's very thematic. The art is some of my favorite in the set. That said, I don't think this one's going to see constructed play. I think the ability is a little wonky. When you first play it, it's just a 3-mana 2/3, very easy for everyone to deal with. Doesn't have any innate value. You kind of have to like have it live for a few turns while you're putting mana into it before it gives you a good leaves play effect. I've been tricked by cards like this before, like a Lore Scale Quaddle back in the day. Oh, man, this card's gonna be so good, and then it was not good. I will not be tricked again. I will not be tricked again. I'm gonna give this one a 1.
Yeah,
Not playable in standard.
I agree. It's just doesn't really do enough on its front side to get bigger. It does require a mana investment, which isn't particularly easy, especially if you're playing spells that draw cards, you know, to get some extra counters on it. So I think Kraken is a card that I'm looking forward to losing to in limited a fair bit, but I just don't see it really making waves in standard, especially because even though it does add a couple blue devotion, it's competing with a lot of other blue heavy cards. You know, I look at a card like Nadir Kraken, like, well, I would almost rather cast like a Gadwick for 0 than play Kraken, which doesn't leave it in a great spot.
Okay. Do we have a community review? Other community ratings? 1. Community agrees. We got a little tentacle here. Oh, cute little guy. Protean Thaumaturge, 1 blue creature, wizard constellation with an enchantment in the battlefield under your control. You may have it become a copy of another target creature, except it has this ability. 1/1. What do you think?
Kind of low on this too, because like copying another target creature means that you lose out on a lot of like the powerful come into play effects that you might cheat on, and it's also just a card that does basically nothing by itself. You know, you're spending 2 mana for a 1/1, and that's just not it in standard really in any way. So yeah, I'm a bit down on the Thaumaturge. Can you see any angle to kind of abuse this?
Nope. It's not even like an enchantment to trigger your other constellation effects, right? It's 2 mana 1/1, very easy to answer, and then you're copying another creature that's in play. Like you said, you're missing out on the comes into play effects. Phantasmal Image is probably like one of the better clone effects we've ever seen in standard, and one of the real benefits of that card is that it was very efficient. You could always like copy something, and then you would get the comes to play effect for a very cheap cost. And it was always at its best when it was like copying something that, like a Titan was in that format. We would copy something, and then you get the comes to play ability and get some value, even if they answered your thing. And this doesn't have that. Like as you pointed out, it's not only doesn't have that, but it's not even always a clone, right? Like you need to be sure that you can trigger the constellation as well. You need to play an enchantment after it.
Yeah, so I think this one.
Think
it's going to be a 1 for me. I'm willing to have some egg on my face later if someone breaks this card, because it does kind of strike me as something that if it sees play, it might just have some crazy actual combo with it. But yeah, I'm just not sure what that would be quite yet.
I think it would have to be like some 3 or 4 card thing, right? That just like needs this very specific effect. I don't see it. I'm gonna give it a 1. There we go.
Yeah, blue definitely coming out much weaker out of the gates than white after a couple cards here.
Passes Intervention. X blue instant. Choose 1. Look at the top X card library. 2 of them. into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then, or you can counter target spell unless its controller pays twice X. So if you play this for 3 mana and you want to counter a spell, they have to pay 2. If you play it for 4, then they have to pay 4, right? Yeah. So not the worst situational counter as far as they go, but it is a little clunky, it's a little expensive. And then the search ability is not quite good as drawing, but it's not bad either.
Yeah, I look at this card and I kind of think of like Supreme Will. You know, when you're getting kind of modal cards, you tend to have to overpay, you know, for any particular side. And one thing that I do like about Thassa's Intervention is it's not just going to be a 4 mana draw 2, and it's not just going to be like a 3 mana counter 2. Like it does scale really nicely into the late game, such that I do think that there is you actually get a really substantial benefit from adding the first or even second copy of this into your deck because, you know, unlike say just, you know, a 4 mana draw 2 type card, even though that's probably what you're going to do with Intervention, you know, the most regularly. If you're you know on turn 10 and you top deck this, all of a sudden it's kind of approximating just like a dig through time effect, albeit for a lot more mana. So I think that this is going to be a card that Control decks wants a little bit of, you know, kind of rounding out both the card selection and the permission suite, but never really going to be, you know, like you know, a 4 of card any deck that I could imagine.
Yeah, you brought up the comparison to Supreme Will. I think Supreme Will is a lot more. The counterspell aspect should be pretty similar. Like a lot of the times, you're gonna be able to counter something for only 3 mana, but you can't actually dig for 3 mana with this card, right? Like if you pay 3 mana with this, you're just drawing a card, right? You're just cycling it, and so then you have to pay 4 mana to draw 2, and that's only inspiration, which is a common is never really seen much standard play, and so then you have to spend 5 mana before you get anything actually useful off the search ability. You're right that you have to spend more for modal abilities, but this card does not impress me.
Yeah, I don't think it quite hits the lows of a 1. So I think I'd be pretty confident giving this a 2 out of 5 here.
I'm giving it a 1. I think it does hit the lows. I think the draw ability in particular is the one that's supposed to be exciting on a card like this, and I don't think it's good enough. I think you have to spend 2 mana before it starts to get interesting. The community disagrees, though. The community agrees with you. They are also giving it a 2 out of 5. Move on to the next card. Thassa's Oracle. Blue for a 1/3 creature merfolk wizard. When Thassa's Oracle enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library where it's devotion to blue. Put up to one of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom in a random order. So if you only have Thassa's Oracle as your source of devotion, you just look at the top 2 cards of your library. You could put up to one. If you want to bottom both of them, you can do that. If you want to keep one, you leave it on top, put the rest on the bottom. It's going to work as a scry in a sense, where you pick the best card in the top X, where X is equal to your devotion. You're going to be keeping that most of the time, and then sometimes none of those cards are going to be what you're looking for. Second part of the ability, if X is greater than or equal to the number of library, you win the game. So there's an alternate win con there. Not going to come up often, but if you ever do win a game off of that, you're going to feel very good about it. Note that it is going to be easier to win the game that way in Limited, where you start with a 40 card deck, as opposed to Standard, where you start with 60.
Yeah, and I think Thassa's Oracle is kind of an interesting one. I feel like if this sees play, a couple things. Like back in the original Mono Blue Devotion days, there was a just Omen Speaker that was very similar. It was scry 2 on a 1/3 body for 2 mana, but only had 1 blue in its mana cost. So in that way, just having an extra blue devotion, I think, makes Thassa's Oracle an upgrade. Having a niche, like, you know, win condition, also a bit of an upgrade. But I just don't know if we're still at the point where a 1/3 for 2 mana with like marginal sifting is impactful enough to really break into standard.
It was and that other card you mentioned, was that one in the blue devotion deck back in the day?
For a little bit, yeah. Like it did show up now and then.
And this one's like even better with devotion, and it digs even deeper and such. If there's a blue devotion deck, I imagine it's going to play this card, right?
Yeah, I do think it would almost have to, and it is worth pointing out we haven't gotten to the Thassa God yet, but this naturally does interact very well with it. You know, with a come into play effect that can be kind of, you know, repeated and abused over the course of many turns.
I think we got a playable here. I'm going to give it a 3.
All right, yeah, I think that's I do think I could see this being an archetype staple. It's kind of contingent on if Blue Devotion does make it. I really would imagine Thassa's Oracle would almost have to be there.
It's going to be embarrassing when this card is just like played in every format. We're giving it a 3 instead of a 5, right? Sometimes innocuous cards like this end up being strong players. How does the community feel? 2! Going in at 2? How dare you? Bunch of merfolk haters. Oh, that's fine. Next card. Strix the Sudden Storm. 3 blue legendary creature, elemental flying. Spells you cast with converted mana cost 5 or greater, cost 1 less to cast, and cannot be countered. 4/5.
This is kind of an interesting one. You know, that there is a flash deck in standard that this card could be put into, but I'm not really sure if it's particularly good because, you know, if I'm reading this right, you know, the Thrix itself can be countered, right? So if the Thrix slips through, then you can really land some haymakers after the. But you know, having a 5 mana creature, even with Flash not get countered, can be kind of difficult. So it seems like the body isn't quite impressive enough to me. The ability isn't quite impressive enough. I'm a little bit low on this one.
You're a little low on this one, huh? I think 5 mana for a 4/5 flyer with flash is like already pretty reasonable stats. That's like similar to where Resta was at, right? Obviously, the cheaper a card is, the more likely it is to see play as like a 4 of and stuff. This one's a legendary, so it's never gonna be a 4 of even in the archetypes it's in. Note that it does give other copies of itself the mana discount. So if you have multiple copies, you can like attack with the first one for 4, and then the opponent attacks in, and you flash the other one into block, and the other one's cheaper and uncounterable. And that's kind of cute.
Yeah, it definitely has some applications, and I think the thing that I look at Thrix and want to do with it is like out of the sideboard of the blue green ramp deck, you know, have it be the card that enables my Nisses to run free, my Cavaliers, the large copies of Hydro Krasis, but you know, like there is kind of always a cap on how much top end you can put in any particular deck, even if that deck is really keen on ramping. So I really don't want to give this a 1, but I'm just going to rate it as about the weakest 2 that I could stomach giving.
All right, I think I'm gonna give it a strong, but a 2 nonetheless. 5's a lot. 5's a lot of mana. What does the community think we got there? A 2, also a 2. All right, we all agree, kind of. Next card, Wave Break Hippocamp, 2 and a blue, enchantment creature, Horsefish. Beautiful art there. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, draw a card. And then we've got a 2/2 body.
Yeah, so I think this one's a little bit interesting too. You know, we saw with Paradise Druid breaking into some flash decks that the decks don't have to operate entirely on their opponent's turn. Like there is going to be some room for sorcery speed stuff, but you know, Paradise Druid and Wave Break Hippocamp kind of pay you off in very different ways. The difference between casting your 4 drops a turn ahead of schedule and starting to accrue some card advantage if you can tap out for a 3-drop and then have it live and then start casting instant spells asks a lot more of this Horsefish. So I think this one actually might just be a 1. I think the effect is quite powerful, but the body and immediate impact, even the opportunity cost of tapping mana on your own turn, are all too high.
I agree with all of that. It is an enchantment creature, so it does trigger Constellation. It works well with there, and we do have some flash enchantments, so there could be some cross synergies with those mechanics in the format. I think if the Wave Break Hippocamp is going to see play, it's either going to have that, it's going to have some bleed over into the Constellation decks, or you're going to be playing it with some very, very, very efficient spells to play on the opponent's turn. If you can play this in like a blue-red deck and then have like a 1 mana removal spell to kill something on the opponent's turn and immediately start drawing cards, then that could be really, really good. I think it plays out a lot better in blue-red than in blue-green, but blue-red's more of a niche deck, so I think a hard 1 or a weak 2 is about where I'm at. You're giving it a 1?
I am, although I will
I'll
definitely
give it a 2 for balance.
We'll definitely agree that adding shock and op into the equation to cast off your Hippocamp is starting to get me a little bit more interested.
A little bit more interested. So it's a 3. You're all up it.
Yeah, 10 out of 10. Changing the rating.
All right. Do we have a community vote? You vote on this one? 3. Community is giving it a strong 3. We convinced them in our All right. Next card. Kiora bests the Sea God 5 blue from Mythic Enchantment Saga. First stage, create a 8/8 blue Kraken creature token with hexproof. Second, tap all non-land permanents target opponent controls. They don't untap during the control tap step. And 3 is gain control of target permanent an opponent controls. Untap it.
Oof, if this card sees play, it is going to be a pretty tough experience playing against it. Like, it's 7 mana is a lot, but just breaking it down exactly what the modes are. An 8/8 that you have no clear path to killing besides, like, blocking it, pretty rough. Having all your stuff get tapped so the blocking is taken out of the equation, and then if you try and block when the third chapter comes around, your opponent probably just steals the best thing that you were lining up for it. So I think that the Sea God card is actually incredibly powerful, and is going to really be key as a way for ramp decks to have like just another tool to fight, slower mid-range decks, things that care about creatures. Like imagine, say like playing this in a ramp mirror could be good. Playing this against slower like red green decks, like I think it's going to have some decks that cannot possibly beat this card, and there's going to be a lot of matchups where you just can never even try and cast it.
What number are you giving?
I think it's a 2, but it's a 2 that, like, if my opponent casts the Sea God, I'm either winning on the spot because I'm counter hit or losing very painfully over 3 turns.
Yeah, I'm gonna be so like normally I rate 7 mana cards pretty lowly, just because it takes more for them to be good, right? There needs to be more conditions correct for your 7 mana card to actually be worth putting in your deck, and then getting to 7 mana to cast it and all of that stuff. But there is some ramp in format. There's some specifically devotion based ramp. If you are playing a devotion deck with a bunch of creatures that are trying to attack in order to kill the opponent, then this seems like the best thing to be doing on your top end. I'm gonna rate a little bit higher. I'm gonna give it a 3, and it might end up being a 4. Probably not gonna be a 5 though. I don't think this one's gonna see play in other formats. That would surprise me.
Maybe turn 4 Nykthos into this in Pioneer. Just kind of spitballing here. Not sure if you can actually do that. But
correct. Let's see what the community thinks. 1. Community gives it a 1. Pretty easy to do. Pretty easy to do with the 7 mana wonky saga like thing. Sweet card though. Thassa, Deep Dwelling, 3 and a blue, legendary enchantment creature. God, indestructible as long as your devotion blue is less than 5. Thassa creature. Beginning of your end step, exile up to one other target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So you get a blink effect on your end step, and then for 4 mana, you can tap another target creature. Note that the blink effect doesn't have to blink a creature when it comes to play ability to get value. You could also give one of your creatures pseudo vigilance, where you attack and then blink it on end of turn, and then suddenly it's untapped to block.
Yeah, I think this is actually kind of exciting to me. I think that there's a lot of pretty strong come into play effects floating around standard. We talked about Thassa's Oracle, and that can get you some repeated card selection. Even something like, well, I look at this and I think of like Agent of Treachery, kind of going as powerful as we can possibly get here with Thassa. And yeah, I think that you can basically get a card with a value almost every turn as long as you have another creature in play with Thassa if you build your deck around it, and that's pretty exciting.
Yes. I think Blue Devotion was like a popular deck last time around. A lot of people really enjoyed playing that deck. I don't think Wizards would cost cards such that Blue Devotion wasn't playable in Standard. It seems like this card is costed to be good to see play. I think Blue Devotion is going to be a thing. I'm gonna give it a 4.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm probably gonna. I'm going to put it at a 3. I think it's going to be very popular in Blue Devotion, but I'm not sure if it can quite break into other decks. I do want to point out though that I absolutely love Arcanist Owl in Standard, like before the new set comes out, and the fact that it both finds Thassa and then goes crazy with it. Once you actually have the Thassa in play, enabling all the devotion by itself, getting some extra cards, I think that could actually be a pretty potent combo.
Oh yeah. If this card sees play in like non-blue, it is going to be the blinky value nonsense, and there are some potential interactions for that. Where's the community at? What you got, community? 4. Community is with me. We stand strong. Yes. All right. We got another color here. That's gonna do it for blue. All blued up. What did you think about blue overall? What was your overall analysis of this color?
Um, kind of weak actually. You look at the cards kind of top to bottom, and beyond, say Thassa, the god, and then Thassa's Oracle. There's not a ton that I'm really excited to play with. So it's going to be interesting to see because blue didn't necessarily need nearly as much help. But it seems like, yeah, just kind of a few real strong highlights and then a lot of cards that I would be shocked if they saw standard play.
I agree. And if you look at our ratings, I gave one white card a one. You gave no white cards a one, and then we both gave three ones in blue. Not all for the same cards. We did disagree on the third one ranking. I gave it to Thassa's Intervention, and you gave it to Cure Best the Sea God. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, uh, seems we agree. Blue quite a bit weaker than white so far. Next color we got coming up here is black, of course. My favorite color. I really like the way that you seem to pay for things with black, right? Like blue, you're just like drawing cards willy nilly. Like, yep, these are my cards. With black, you also have to like pay some life in there. You have to pay some other resource. You have to like sacrifice a creature, and sometimes you get a strong effect because you're paying for things in different ways. I think it leads to more creative deck building and synergies and stuff like that, which I enjoy. I enjoy that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. If drawing spell or drawing cards, that's cool and all, but like if I can sacrifice a 1/1 to like draw a card and get a little bit of value, that's actually just kind of my sweet spot. I think that's my jam. And also we're actually going to see some pretty cool cards that lead to that. Paying life to draw here. This one that I'm actually really excited to talk about a couple cards in. But yeah, let's see what we have here for black.
Euphemia, the cacophony. How do you is that? Am I pronouncing that right? Cacophony,
Cacophony, I think.
cacophony. I don't know. I've like read that word before, and I have no idea how to pronounce it. I've never heard anybody say this word in my lifetime of supposed English speaking. Anyway, Euphemia, one in a black legendary enchantment creature, Harpy, flying at the beginning of your end step. You may exile an enchantment card from the graveyard. If you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. It's a 2 and a 1. So 2 mana for a 2/1 flyer. Already pretty efficient. It's an enchantment in and of itself, so it's going to feed off of itself. If you draw multiple copies, you can play the second copy. It'll go to your graveyard, and you can exile it to make a zombie. It's not bad to draw multiples of. It's pretty nice when you have a legendary creature where it's not bad to draw multiples of. You can put 4 of this into your deck pretty easily. And then, of course, it's an enchantment itself, and then it works well with enchantments being in your graveyard. So, yeah, I like this card. I like this card a lot. I think it's quite good.
Yeah, I look at this and I see like a really kind of nice and I think important to have payoff for caring about self milling. It's just a lot of potential power for a low investment. So I think the hardest part about Ephemia is just being able to get stuff in your graveyard outside of things just like trading off in combat, right? Like if we still had Stitcher Supplier and I could get a zombie on turn 2 off of Femia, I would be really excited by it. But I think right now it's going to take a little bit more. But I think the payoff is actually still sufficient to make that amount of work worth it.
What's your number?
It's gonna be a 2, mostly because I don't think this goes in anything but one deck, and I'm not even sure that deck will pop up. But I could be shooting too low.
Okay. Yeah. I disagree, but only slightly. I'm gonna give it a 3 because yeah, I know I think the card is just like clearly worth it, and when a card is clearly worth it, we'll probably see some play. You're right that it doesn't go into every archetype. It's not like a hero's downfall effect or something like that, which is why I didn't. Or did you see the community rating? I missed it.
Yeah, that was a 4 from the folks at home.
Ooh. You need getting spicy. Next card, the zombie token. The zombie token that Euphemia creates. Look at that sweet art. I'm into it. Eat to Extinction. Oh, so much flavor on this one. 3 and a black. Instant exile target creature or planeswalker. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard.
I think this card's sweet. I really like the ability to pay a little bit more mana for a full spell, but have it be easy to splash, capable of killing everything and just getting rid of problem cards, right? I think E2 Extinction is actually going to be super necessary in standard because it gets rid of Gods, it gets rid of the Titans we're going to talk about a little bit later. And yeah, I mean, trading up for Planeswalkers, Cavaliers, like the amount of things that are really clean eats in standard. I think it's super high, and actually, it's gonna make me want to put this card at like a 3, but it's a 3 rating that I'll probably put like 1 or 2 of in most decks, but it'll be in a lot of my decks.
Yeah. I think a card that just is gonna see play in a that I'm gonna actually get a 4 to, especially when it makes me so hungry. Me so very hungry. Num 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 num. I think one of the things you might be underrating about this Planeswalker, and I mean, maybe not, like, we only have so much time to talk, is the look at the top of card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. Uh, Having a random bits of incidental self mill plays very well with escape. And so any deck that cares about escape is also going to get a little bit of value off the Seed to Extinction. If you want to play a escape card that's like escape 3 from your graveyard, Seed to the Extinction feeds 2 of that by itself, right? So it's like almost drawing you cards in a way. And if you see a card with escape on top of your library that you want to put into your graveyard, that's like almost like drawing a card. If you have like a stocked graveyard already, kind of nice, kind of nice. Let's see what chat thinks. Chat, what you got? Also a 4.
Yeah, definitely does. I think a really nice job of just rounding out standards interaction, like Black's interaction in standard, I should say. Between Murder Strider and Eat to Extinction, you kind of have a lot of your bases covered, and you're doing a lot of like cool incidental, just bonus value things at the same time. Whether it's kind of getting the extra graveyard interaction like you talked about, or the 2/3 lifelinker. So yeah, I think this card is. I'm just really excited to play with this. It's nice to have powerful gods with appropriate answers, and I think we might have actually checked both boxes so far in this set.
Absolutely, and it's an answer to Planeswalkers as well. Yeah, yeah. Planeswalkers can also be frustrating to answer. Yeah, love that analysis. I'm with you. Erebos' Intervention. Speaking of answers to gods, X black instant. Choose one. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. You gain X life, or exile up to twice X target cards from graveyards.
I think this might be my favorite intervention so far. It's just like it's just great. 2 very relevant modes. We already cared about graveyards a little bit before this set, and we're already seeing a lot of different things that care about putting cards in there. And it's a removal spell that has some incidental life gain attached to that effect. So playing against an aggro deck, being able to say, kill a Stormfist Crusader, gain 2 life. That's a pretty solid use of 3 mana, and the fact that you can do things like exile all of your opponent's cats, Cauldron Familiars, or stop an opponent from getting a Cavalier of Thorns card back on top. This card really does a lot, and it is a bit overcosted like these Moto spells will be, but I think that both of the options super relevant.
I agree. I agree with that analysis. The you gain X life part is pretty important because we've had target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, and it's been so bad because you're paying an extra mana most of the time. Like say your opponent's playing 3 mana for a 3/3, 4 mana for a 4. Obviously, it's not always like that, but usually they've got creature sizes roughly in accordance with the casting cost. So if you've got another colored pip on top of that X, usually you're spending more to kill the opponent's creature than they actually paid to cast it. However, if you're gaining some life on top of it, then it kind of makes up for it, right? It makes up for the inefficiency.
Yeah, definitely. I think life gain. Oh, sorry there, but I think life gain against aggro can actually pretty directly translate into turns and extra cards. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of what makes this, lack of efficiency. It makes up for it by just giving you like kind of close to just a full spell's worth of effect off that life gain.
Yep. Yeah. So it's a lot better than other -X targeted removal spells have looked in the past because of that. And then of course exile up to twice X target cards from graveyards. Not only are you hitting the creatures with not only such, but if you can hit more, right? If you can nuke their whole graveyard, then the future cards that they have with escape are going to be hindered by that as well. They won't have that resource to work on. I'm gonna give it a 3. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. This is a really solid 3, and just a nice tool to have in your potential. Like sometimes I just bring a box of different removal spells to a format and just like, well, what do I think I'm gonna need for this? And I can't imagine an Erebos Intervention will not always be in that box if I'm bringing a black deck with me.
Mm-hmm. And what does chat think? What does chat think on this one? Also a 3. Next card, Gravebreaker Lamia, 5 mana for a 4/4 lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a card, put into your graveyard, then shuffle your library, and then spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. So it's an enchantment. It plays well with enchantment synergies. It's got lifelink, very relevant ability, a lot of different matchups. It's a snake lamia. I don't know what a lamia is, but maybe that's a sweet creature type. Who knows? And then when it enters the battlefield, you're getting a card, putting it directly into your graveyard, which is value. A lot of times that's very similar to drawing a card. It's an entomb effect in a format where we've got creatures that can flash, like quote unquote, flashback themselves with the escape mechanic, and we've got some reanimation effects as well. I think this card's sweet. It plays well with the White Saga if you want to play a white-black style deck. The ability is relevant. Both of its abilities like seem to work with each other. Not the lifelink one, but the other two. I think this card's good.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting to me. I guess what I'm kind of hung up on is what is the best thing we can put into our graveyard. I look at this and I think like maybe we're just getting a red black Titan for ourselves into the yard. I think that a lot of its value is going to be, kind of dependent on can we afford to pay 5 mana for an entomb with a relevant body. And I don't. It's not obvious to me that we have something like that already. So I guess I'm going to give this card probably a 2, but a lot of that, maybe comes from a lack of initial creativity for my part because I do think that a 4 mana 4/4 life or a 5 mana 4/4 life link can still be pretty solid to buy you time to cast whatever card you did just put in the graveyard. It's pretty unlikely that you would cast Lamia and die before you get to use whatever card you dumped. So I think it seems, I don't know, kind of reasonable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot depends how much the enchantment creature type matters. A lot depends on what value you're actually getting. The tutor ability. It's hard to evaluate that sort of ability in a vacuum, right? Like what you're doing with it matters a whole lot.
Yeah, and while I gave it a 2, I could actually see this card honestly being both a pretty easy 1, or again also it could even skew up to a 3 as being like a really important piece in a certain archetype. So yeah, gonna kind of split the difference here.
I'm with you. I'm also give it a 2 for the reasons you provided. Does chat agree? Chat also agrees. We agree on the Snake Lady. Nightmare Shepherd, 2 black enchantment creature, demon, flying. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, create a token copy of that creature, except it's 1/1. It's a nightmare in addition to its other types. Darby, what do you think?
I'm trying to, I guess when I looked at this Shepherd, the first thing I thought of was kind of mimic that. I don't know. You don't really quite get the repeatable value in that way, but you certainly can if you have lots of creatures that you can dump or sacrifice yourself for value. So, this is a card that I would kind of be surprised if it saw standard play because what you're getting when you cast it, unlike the last card we looked at, there's no putting a card in the graveyard whether it dies or not. It is just a 4/4 for 4, and then stuff has to happen for it to pay off. But it does seem like the value can be pretty immense if untap with it, or if you have a free sacrifice effect. A card we're going to talk about a little bit in Woe Strider, you can actually do some pretty messed up things immediately.
Yeah, sacrifice effects are kind of the name of the game in standard. So I'm gonna give this one a bit higher rating than you, I imagine. Um, yeah, right now the food combo is like really dominant, and there's all these like free sacrifice abilities going around. The black red sacrifice decks with priest have been like borderline good enough. They've seen like a little bit of standard play. 4 mana for a 4/4 flyer, I don't think is a terrible rate if the ability is good enough. And this is an ability that you don't have to pay any mana for, and you just get some nice value. Yeah, I
Yeah,
like this card a lot. Imagine like playing like a second Judith with this one in play, right? And then it dies, and then you exile it, and it comes into play as a copy, and then that dies because it's a legend, and you're getting all these pings. You just murder everything. And, oh yes,
and there are situations where if you play Nightmare Shepherd, let's say your board is a witch's oven and like a mayhem devil. Playing Nightmare Shepherd can actually make you basically have a mayhem devil for like a large amount of the game, right? They have to kill the shepherd first because if they kill the mayhem devil, you can, you'll be getting it back, and really all you need from that card is just its, not necessarily its 3/3 body, just the text that says when a creature gets sacrificed or when a permanent gets sacrificed, ping. So I guess Nightmare Shepherd is definitely a card that can kind of accentuate some already pretty powerful sacrifice energies for sure.
yeah. I think this card's going to see a lot of standard play. I think there's a chance that it ends up seeing Pioneer play. I think it's going to be a sweet one in Cube. So I'm going to give it a 4, but I would not be surprised. I'd be more surprised if I was overrating it than underrating it. Or wait, no, what did I say? I'd be more surprised if it saw no play in standard than if it saw play in other formats. I think there's a chance that it sees a little bit of play in other formats because I think that static ability is sweet. I think you can get a lot of value off of that very easy.
Yeah, I'm going to aim, I guess, quite, as you predicted, I think quite a bit lower. I think I would probably give it a 2, but this is a 2 that I understand that, like, it's not. My reservations come from the just a little bit of extra mana that I want to pay. Like, if this card could be like 1 black and a 3/3, I would be really excited about it, getting access to the effect earlier. But it's probably because that would be a lot more powerful. This is still, I think,
Fishbomb was talking in the chat about this, the Grey Merchant, and then sack the Grey Merchant of it immediately is an 8-point swing. This was just with those.
Man. Yeah, that does not ask very much of you to get a lot. So yeah, I'm willing to be wrong in this one, but I think I'm going to do it.
I think it's costed. I think it's costed to see play, right? It's an enchantment, so it's going to play well with enchantment effects. Black Devotion can play with Black Devotion effects. Grey Merchant. If there's any card in this set, if there's any Devotion card that's going to like make an archetype viable, it's probably going to be Grey Merchant, right? That's a pretty good one. Anyway, next card. We can move ourselves along here. Oh wait, did we get a chat reaction to this one? Did we get a chat rating?
Yeah, let's get that community rating pulled up.
A 4. 4 is pretty good. Chat thinks format staple. All right, Treacherous Blessing, 2 and a black enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards. Whenever you spell life, when it becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. Darby, what you think?
I've got 2 words on this one, and they are Doom Foretold. There's a lot of cards in Theros that I do think play very well with Foretold, but this one just seems kind of unbelievable. Permanent that does everything you need up front. 3 cards for 3 mana. Kind of actually makes me think of like a better Painful Truths in a lot of situations, and that was a card that's kind of dominating slower matchups for kind of on and off periods of time after that got released. And Painful Truths had basically no extra synergy, and Treacherous Blessing does have, I think, at the very least, enchantments matter.
Enchantments matter, devotion matters. It is a permanent that's play. Those are definitely things. I think the downside is much, much higher than Painful Truths. If you play this because you need to hit land drops or what have you, and then it just drains you for the rest of the game because you don't find a sack outlet, is pretty horrendous, especially in the wrong matchup. But then usually in the wrong matchup, you're Painful Truths out, right? Yeah. So part of this is going to depend on the metagame. The more aggressive the metagame is, the worse a card like this gets where you trade cards for life. And then part of it's going to depend on how good the decks where you actually have sack outlets for enchantment are. Doom Foretold being the one that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think for this one, really how I kind of compare it to Painful Truths is like, how often can you expect to be able to get rid of Treacherous Blessing before you cast your 3rd spell, right? Because if you do it before then, it's just kind of free real estate. But again, if you start to pay 4 or 5 or even more life because you have the blessing, then you start to get into like actively detrimental territory for the card draw, not quite with it. So I guess I'm pretty confident that you can get rid of it before you hit that 3 or 4 threshold. But that's going to probably depend on having more than just Doom Foretold to get the job done. So I'm going to give this card a 3 because I think it's really powerful for the amount of mana you're spending. But I can also understand that like people are going to lose some games to their own Treacherous Blessing that they might not have lost otherwise.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely powerful for the mana you're spending. But I mean, like, what is it? Curvix fight the triple black, draw 4 cards, lose half your life total, or what have you. I might be mistaking the card name. I think there's a few cards that do that. Anyway, I think this card is powerful. I think I'm a little bit more afeared of the danger behind it than you are. I don't think like every deck can play this card, and the decks that can play it might not want to play it in all matchups. I'm gonna give it a 2. Let's see what chat thinks. 3. Chat agrees with you.
All right. Next card. Chat likes Dirtling. Not bad.
Everybody likes to dirtle. Timuret calls the dead. Timuret, Calls the Dead, 2 and a black. As this saga enters, and after your draw step, add a lore counter. The first lore, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may exile a creature enchantment from your graveyard. If you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. That is the second step as well. And then 3, you gain X life and scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. So this card is a little bit more situational than History of Benalia. It's easier to cast, but being easier to cast isn't necessarily a plus in a format where devotion matters. Uh, um, but you do have that zombie synergy, right? And it's and some of that synergy is self-contained, where you're gaining X life and scrying X, where X is the number of zombies you control. If you ever do play this and you brick on a zombie token and you end up getting like just a single zombie token out of it, you're gonna feel terrible. That said, escape is a mechanic in this format, and this card fuels that very well, right? And mills 6 all by its lonesome.
Yeah, I think Turmeric Calls the Dead is going to be pretty important because there's not that many self-mill effects in Standard right now. Like, I could think of Glowspore Shaman as the ones that exist before Theros comes out. So Turmeric Calls the Dead is pretty nice that it both pays you off and enables the graveyard synergy. I think it's going to be necessary in decks that care about it because there's just not that many self-mill kind of avenues available. And what you're getting, if everything's working as intended, which is maybe a big leap, but if everything's working as intended, 3 mana for 2 zombies and that final chapter of gaining and scrying seems good. So like this card is actually pretty impressive to me, and I think that the only thing holding it back is going to be, a lack of that self mill. But if we're just rating this card on what it can do by itself, I think I'm pretty comfortable giving this one a 3 as well, because I do think it does compare pretty favorably to History of Benalia, but is even more important in the decks that are capable of casting it. I don't know. I guess one of the things is, what are we comparing it to that costs 3 mana in black? I'm not really sure how contested that slot would be, but I think, again, if you care about the graveyard, it's just hard not to be playing this card, it seems. Let's see. It looks like Caleb's getting some audio stuff resolved real quick. But yeah, I think with Turmeric Calls the Dead, I don't know. It plays very well with the first card we talked about, the Ephemia. So I kind of see those 2 cards coming together as a bit of a pair, and kind of giving you a density of payoffs, density of ways to really take advantage.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah, so what I'm sorry, I was reconnecting to Discord there for a second. Just took a might second, but did you give a number rating?
Yeah, I'd give this one a 3. I think it's pretty powerful effect.
Okay. I think I might be underrating it. I think you might be closer, but it doesn't excite me. Just like the chance of whiffing when you play it on 3 if you don't have something for sure. Seems like kind of disastrous. I don't know how many like playable zombies there are in the format. I guess Grey Merchant is a zombie, right? So there might be a little zombie sub theme going on there. Could be underrating it for sure. What does the community think on this one? We got a rating. Community also is saying 2. It's in that same range as us there. We all kind of agree. Woe Strider, 2 and a black for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 white goat creature token. And you can sacrifice another creature to scry 1. So it comes into play with a creature to sacrifice, and then it's also a free sacrifice outlet. It's got escape, 3 black, exile 4 other cards from your graveyard, and it escapes with 2 1/1 counters on it. So it comes back as a 5/4.
Yeah, this card is I actually thought that we had kind of learned our lesson about free instant speed sacrifice outlets. Because last time we had one, Nantuko Husk, it was a kind of centerpiece in the best deck in Standard, the 4-color rally. And Woe Strider kind of hits a lot of the same notes. It doesn't necessarily get huge by itself immediately, but it enables you to sacrifice. It kind of combines Nantuko Husk with Viscerous here, right? Like, it's letting you dig, it's giving you a creature to sacrifice to get that value immediately. And it's also a card that your opponent probably has to kill, because if you're playing Woe Strider, it's going to be really important to your deck strategy. But if they do, well, escaping 4 and casting it from the graveyard seems pretty reasonable, like not too high of an escape cost. So I think Woe Strider is incredible. I might be rating too much on kind of the pedigree of this type of card. It's possible Standard's gotten a bit more powerful than it was when Nantuko Husk was around, but I'm gonna give this card a 3 too, or a 3 as well. But I could easily see it like being a 4, being a card that is just a huge piece of standard.
Do you remember the one green black 2/3 that came into play with a Saproling token?
There was I remember like Catacomb Sifter from that
yeah,
format.
Catacomb Sifter. Didn't that have the static effect that like whenever one of your creatures died, you could scry one, something along those lines?
Yeah, that's what it did. Yeah.
Yeah, that one reminds me of Woe Strider quite a lot. That card saw a ton of play. Just like the having multiple bodies when it came into play, and then the scry effects that also saw play in Rally. This is kind of like a merging of that and Husk, right? It's kind of a merging of the two, and then you also have the escape value. So you can even like sack one Woe Strider to the other one, then bring it back. Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think this card's really good. Is it going to see play in older formats? It's a horror. Might see a little bit of Pioneer play. Hard to
Yeah, it's
imagine this
possible that
card not doing things in Standard. So I think it's like whether or not we rate it a 4 or a 5, right?
I think 4 or 5. Yeah, I might actually be willing to move up from a 3 to a 4 because there's just so much that this card does. I would be shocked to see it see 0 standard play, and that's kind of like what I imagine the baseline. It has the potential to just end up. This is a card that can be broken, right, with those repeatable free sack effects. So I think 4 is the floor, but I don't know if I can go 5.
Yeah, it's not a flashy 5, right? Even if it does see play in a bunch of formats, even if it is like a 4 of in a format defining deck, it's definitely not flashy. It's not like a Baneslayer Angel type card or a Titan or something along those lines. But yeah, I do think it's quite good. I'm gonna give it a 4 as well, but could be surprised by this one.
And see what the community says about this. If they're as high as we'll try, it looks like a 4 as well there.
Also giving us a 4. All right, maybe we convince them with our words. Maybe we're influencing the community rating.
First time chat's ever listened to me.
And here we are. We have another god, Erebos Bleak-Hearted, 3 to black, legendary enchantment creature god, indestructible. As long as your devotion is devotion to black is less than 5, Erebos isn't a creature. Whenever another creature you control dies, you may pay 2 life if you do draw a card, and then 1 in the black, sacrifice another creature. Target creature gets -2, -1 till end of turn. 5/6.
Yeah, Erebos is an interesting one. I look at this card, and there are decks that do care about sacrifice a lot already. But those decks tend to be multicolored to the point where getting 5 devotion seems pretty difficult. I think that Erebos is kind of the first god that we've seen that you're like almost even just happy enough to have it without the god becoming a creature. But that being said, I'm not exactly sure if there's a mono black deck that obviously already exists that this can kind of slide into, or if there is, it's going to take a little bit more kind of like theory crafting and piecing together.
Well, I think that card. I don't think a mono black deck exists in the current format where this slots into. But Gray Merchant kind of just like brings it with it, right? It's just like, yeah, here's the mono black deck. It's Gray Merchanting, and we've got Bolas and Citadel around and stuff. And people had monkeyed with mono black even before the printing of Gray Merchant. So I think Erebos is going to see a lot of play. The last Erebos looked really lackluster on paper. I think like power level wise, the last one was one of the weaker gods, but it had an ability that played well in Grey Merchant mirrors, and it had a little bit of value attached, and so it saw play anyway. Just because like a 5x indestructible creature is totally reasonable. It's not gonna be a 4 of. It's not like a Thassa, right? Where Thassa, the 3-mana Thassa from Mono Blue Devotion way back when was so good that you just like played 4. And if you drew multiples, that was okay because you've got a Thassa on board and you're probably winning because the card is so strong. But I think this one's going to see play as like a 1 or 2 of in the devotion deck, just like it did last time around, just like its last version did. I think there's a lot of comparisons here, right? It still costs 4, still has 5 power. The toughness doesn't matter a whole lot when it comes to indestructible, unless there's like -X effects, of course. Yeah, a little bit of value, kind of a wonky ability, very similar to the last Erebos. I'm gonna give it a 3.
Yeah, I think 3 is kind of where I'm at as well. It's definitely the weakest god we've looked at so far. But Black also, again, does, to its credit, seem to be the best deck at really doing like well in the pip category. Like you mentioned, Bolas the Citadel, Ayara is a definitely very playable Black Devotion enabler that also keys pretty well with Erebos. And I could even imagine like Deathless Knight letting you have repeated sacrifice fodder for Erebos if you really wanted to. So yeah, I think this card's going to have a home, but probably not going to be, you know, a dedicated centerpiece, more just like an incidental, well, I am mono black for these other reasons, and it kind of silly not to play at least a little bit of the effect.
Okay. So it sounds like we agree on the rating. Does the chat agree, though? That's chat agrees as well. And that brings us up to the end of the black, rares, and mythics. What did you think about black overall?
Yeah, black seems sweet. It's got, it's leaning into the graveyard a bit, and I could see this package of cards, with Timur Calls the Dead, Family of the Cacophony, ending up kind of making a new deck around them. It's got some really, really high highs, I think, with Woe Strider looking great. I think E2 Extinction and Erebos' Intervention being really good removal. I just think black is well rounded. It's got great threats and great interaction, so it seems like a big gainer here.
Oh, absolutely. It seems like it's gained a lot there. Um, I talked about Grey Merchant with like a few different ratings. We're only touching the rares and the mythics, but that's a card that I think is going to have a big impact in the format, even though it's just an uncommon printing and a reprint at that. But a lot of these cards gain because of that, because Grey Merchant is probably going to bring its own archetype back into standard with it. And then yeah, there's just a lot of powerful cards, and neither you nor me nor chat gave anything a 1, so already miles ahead of blue, and possibly better than white. Even though we gave white a 5, there were a couple of cards that I was personally considering black were like borderline 5ish. So I probably think that black's the strongest color that we've rated so far. How do you feel about a break, Darby?
Hey, I'm always down for a break.
I could use a quick bathroom break, and then we can come back and do the 2 remaining colors here. We've got red, green, multicolored, and artifact to polish off in a few minutes. We'll be back in a second, folks. See you soon. Hey, welcome back, everybody. We are back live with the Theros Beyond Death set review. Me and my co-host Wyatt Darby here. How's it going, Wyatt?
Doing well. Looking forward to some sweet new cards, and I think we've covered some cool ones already. So I don't know. I'm excited for Theros.
Some really cool ones. I'm actually more excited now than I was after I had just like read through the review. Like hearing other people's ideas to bounce off of is like, it's pretty nice. Way to build up hype.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've knocked down 3 of the colors so far. If you're coming in a little bit late, the next one we have up is red, and a color that is very near and dear to my heart, and one that I'm actually kind of interested to see how many new tools it's gotten, because red aggro was a deck that was really popular kind of about a year ago now, right after the release of Guilds of Ravnica, but hasn't seen a ton of love since then. So I'm kind of interested, in particular, looking for some red beatdown cards here.
I like me some red cards too. I don't play mono red very often. I've been enjoying it in Pioneer. I've been playing some goblins there. It's been fun. I do enjoy red when combined with other colors, though. It gives you access to effects like reach and efficient removal that other colors just don't necessarily do as well. And I am definitely a Grixis mage, so yeah. Let's see what we got. The Akroan War, 3 in a red. First stage, gain control of target creature for as long as the Akroan War remains on the battlefield. Second, until your next turn, creatures your opponent control attack each combat if able. And then 3 is each tapped creature deals damage to itself equal to its power.
This one is kind of interesting. I think the Akroan War, I'm gonna give it a 1. I think mostly what I look at it as, sometimes there are red aggro decks cannot attack through a large creature, right? If you're playing like the classic mono red versus mono green, you can't attack into their questing beast. It'll just block and kill whatever you have. So where I could see a Akroan War doing something is kind of being a good sideboard card in those matchups, like steal your best creature, force you to attack, and then try and kill you on the crackback. But I'm still a little bit pessimistic on this thing actually making it a standard.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when I first read this card, I was like, oh, that's quite good. That's quite powerful. But I think part of that review was thinking about it in terms of limited. You're stealing a creature. It doesn't gain haste like a lot of threatened effects do, but you do get to keep it for several turns, which is not too shabby. And then the third ability of the Akroan War can actually kill the creature itself. It can kill the creature that you steal with it, right? So you might end up getting some kind of a one-sided sweeper effect off of this card. You're stealing your opponent's best creature. It's making your opponent's like attack into it. So if there's a creature that they have over there where the power is less than the toughness, like maybe you're eating that creature in the attack, and then you get to attack with their best creature on 3 to deal them damage and set it up for or I'm sorry, I've got my turns mixed up. So like the first turn that you would steal, and the second turn you would choose to either attack or block with that creature that you stole. And then with the third one, each tapped creature deals damage equal to itself, equal to its power. So red wants to be aggressive. It seems like the abilities are lined up to be aggressive, but I think that third ability could be like weirdly good. Weirdly good anytime you got a creature battle going on. If it does see play in standard, I think it's going to be as a sideboard card. It's going to be a hard card to main deck when it's just like absolutely dead against decks that don't have very many creatures, against control decks. So it's going to be a hard card to justify on that front. But yeah, I think this card has some application. Anytime you're in an aggro mirror, anytime your opponent's playing some piddlers, anytime they've got blockers that you need to break through.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna give this. I think I'm gonna give it a 1 still, but I do think that there could be some situations where it breaks into sideboards. And if you look at it as like an expensive steal effect that eventually lets you kill the creature that you steal, if you want to attack with it in the meantime, it can be powerful. But it just seems like a little bit too finicky for my taste. Like a little bit too much has to kind of line up.
The sweeper effect also hits your own things. Is the wonky part. So it's very complicated in how you choose to play it. But I mean, you do have a lot of control there, and your opponent does not have much control, right? The second stage makes them attack if able, so they're for sure gonna have all their creatures dealing damage to themselves.
Yeah, I think when I play red, I feel pretty obligated to mindlessly attack every turn with all my creatures, so I could see this card just leading me down a dark path.
Oh, sure. I'm gonna give it a 2 because I do think it is sideboard playable. I do think it's like a good answer to giant threats and stuff. But you're probably right. You are the red mage. You are the red master. If I had to bet on one of us evaluating this card correctly, I'd bet on you.
Yeah, it's not nearly a dragon enough, nor does it have haste or exert to kill creatures. So
yeah, it doesn't have those aggressive abilities, but the potential for a one-sided wrath is pretty sweet. Anyway, how do you tap your things? You tap your things by attacking, or the second ability of the Acheron War forces the opponents to attack. So they have to attack with all of their creatures that they can if able. And the third ability is going to deal each tapped creature damage to itself. Oh, someone's saying how are you tapping your things to like kill your own things? Yeah, because I was making the point that it hits your own stuff too. But this is triggering during your draw step, so it's just not going to do that, is it? Yeah, good point. Silly me, silly Caleb. Well, that makes it better than I was saying. Still give it 2 though.
Pretty interesting comment on war if it just killed everything on that final chapter, but nope, it's much more powerful.
Just the opponent stuff, yeah. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out, Chad. My brain was all confoozled.
And this community does get that one a 3 though. Kind of seeing, I think some of the more hard to achieve upside. I think more than I'm definitely giving it credit for, but. Yeah, I think this one at the very least definitely limited powerhouse, and I think that a card that does serve some. It's interesting because you're making an opponent attack you, and that might be okay in a race if you can get some good value blocks off. But there's a lot of situations where that might just be what they're wanting to do anyway. They could utilize that. They could kind of brick that final chapter sometimes. So yeah, I'm excited to see it.
As Chad pointed out, like I was saying, like it would like kill the creature you stole. It's not going to do that as well, so that it doesn't have that upside like I was talking about. Pretty much everything that I said in my review of this card is just wrong and you should ignore. But that happens sometimes when you're evaluating new cards, right? It's easy to get tripped up when you haven't actually seen it in play before, and that's another reason that I think there's a lot of value in these set reviews, right? Because you're getting that extra layer of feedback on these cards. Anyway. Next thing, Phoenix of Ash, 1 red, creature Phoenix, flying haste, 2 and a red. Phoenix of Ash gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Not a bad late game ability there. Fire breathing's always nice, especially on an evasive threat like this one. Escape, 2 red, exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. and then Phoenix of Ash escapes with a 1/1 counter on it, so it comes back as a 3/3.
Yeah, I think this card's sweet. Red is a deck that's pretty naturally capable of getting things into your graveyard. You know, you tend to play a lot of burn spells, stuff that isn't necessarily a permanent on the battlefield. Phoenix of Ash, you know, it hits immediately. Flying plus haste means that it's going to consistently deal at least a little bit of damage the turn you play it. You know, having the mana sink plays actually pretty well with Experimental Frenzy, where if you have a Phoenix on the battlefield and a Frenzy in play, it doesn't necessarily even matter if I'm breaking on spells, I still have something to do. And yeah, the escape is kind of the classic Phoenix thing, you know, the ability to have kind of a threat in a can over and over again. I think the Phoenix kind of checks a lot of boxes on top of being a good devotion tool. So I think this card um, seems like the second 3-drop in red. You know, I definitely see this one as being better than Legion Warboss in a lot of scenarios where ground decks, you know, big green creatures are going to be blocking you up. Yeah, I like the Phoenix a lot. I think this one's like a 3 in my mind at first glance.
Okay, what do you think keeps this from being a 4?
Probably just like the inherent underpowered nature of just red decks, and like kind of the double red casting cost working against it when it comes to, you know, how many decks can actually slot this thing into it. You know, like take advantage of the aggressive nature of the card, but also be a deck that's not just mono red that can cast a red 2-drop or
Okay,
3-drop.
so you think this is a staple for mono red specifically, but you think it's only going to see play in that archetype. That's what's going to keep it at 3. It's definitely not going to be seeing play in other formats, right? It's not gonna be the next Arclight Phoenix. To escape, you do have to pay 4 mana instead of free, so it's not quite that good. Yeah, I think you're right. I think this one will see a lot of play, but it's just going to be in that one archetype. It'll probably see play through its whole existence in standard.
Yeah, no, I love it. I just think that, you know, I guess when it comes to Phoenix, there's not even that many ways to really cleanly exile it too. So I think it's really important to have access to threats that are going to be kind of the first thing that's resilient to sweepers in your deck too. And I think this card does a really nice job of that.
It's resilient to sweepers, and it's a mana sink in the late game, so doing a whole lot of good things here. A great card. I think it's almost a 4, almost a 4. But I'll agree with you. What does chat think? What's chat's rating? Also a 3. All right. Pretty cut and dry. And on fire. Peripheros's intervention. X and a red sorcery. Choose one. Create an X1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So it's a ball lightning effect, but for the amount of mana that you can put into it, not very much damage if you don't have much mana in play, but a mana sink in the late game. And then the other ability is deals twice X damage to target creature or planeswalker. So for 2 mana, you're dealing 2 damage to a creature, and for 3 mana, you're dealing 4 damage to a creature. Yeah. So you can kill some very large things, but you're not killing gods.
Yeah, kind of unlike the Erebos' intervention, which has a very similar effect as one of the options. You aren't really getting. You actually are just kind of. I guess you're not necessarily overpaying to kill things because you're getting the twice X damage, but you know this is kind of interesting in red, where the number of burn spells they can play that can't actually hit a player directly is always going to kind of be limited. You see a lot of this type of effect be relegated to the sideboard. And Perforce's intervention is interesting because, like, I look at it, I'm not sure how well it compares to, say, like a Lava Coil type card. You would need to want that type of effect, but also still appreciate the upside for the random kind of fireball creature,
I mean,
which I'm not exactly sure how that lines up.
Yeah, like you were saying, like you were talking about, there's only so much room for red cards that can't deal damage, but I mean, this one can, like, technically deal damage, right? In the X1, it's not a very efficient way of going about it, but it can convert to damage if you really need it to. Yeah, I don't think either mode is like really what you're looking for. Usually when I get excited about a modal card, and it's because there's a mode where I'm just like, oh yeah, I want that. And neither one of these like particularly excites me.
Yeah, there's been a lot of really high loyalty planeswalkers in standard too. So the intervention's going to cost, you know, like to kill like a Nissa who shakes the world. You know, your opponent's going to cast the Nissa. They're going to make a 3/3 attack you with it, and then you have to untap and spend 4 mana to clear the planeswalker, which is probably going to stop you from dying in some situations, but doesn't leave you with much room to do anything else on that follow up turn. So I think the sorcery speed is. I think this is the first intervention that's actually capped at being a sorcery, and I think that is a pretty big deal because if you can make a random a large elemental to block with, or kill a creature or planeswalker, untap, cast a thing, we're starting to be kind of interesting with our options. But I think right now this one's just kind of like just a 2 and one that I'm not really super excited to play with.
Someone in chat was comparing this to Fight with Fire, but I think the main difference in terms of like having a big mana card in the late game to burn out your control opponent with, one, the X1 is like weak to a removal spell, whereas Fight with Fire you're just like going face and like potentially clearing a planeswalker or creature at the same time, like being able to split the damage eventually. And then you were also getting more damage than you were spending mana with Fight with Fire, whereas this one you were always spending more mana than you're doing damage, which is a kind of a big downside. It's just not a very efficient card in that regard. It's a little efficient when it comes to like clearing planeswalkers or creatures. If you need to kill like a very giant creature out of red, or if you need to kill a planeswalker that starts with a lot of loyalty, then then it's like okay at that. But yeah, this card doesn't excite me. I don't think I'm gonna cast it. I'm gonna give it a 1.
And I'll give it a 2. Just kind of appreciating that red does still have a problem with large creatures. It's nice to have, you know, having this in your sideboard means you can board it in to kill, say, a Lovestruck Beast, or if you're playing against a control deck and you want to cut shock for a card that could deal more damage, intervention could have some utility there. So I think it's a 2, but again, not the most powerful intervention we've seen so far.
Yeah, you're spending 4 mana to kill Lovestruck Beast, so more than
Yeah.
the beast itself costs. But if you need to kill it, you need to kill it. Not the worst thing ever. All right, and then what does chat feel? A 2. Chat agrees. Chat agrees with yourself. Bam. Elemental. Trample haste. Storm Herald. 2 and a red for a creature human shaman with haste. It's a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, return any number of aura cards. Sorry, getting my tongue wrapped around my eye tooth here, so I can't see what I'm saying. Let's see. When Storm Herald enters the battlefield, return any number of aura cards from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to creatures you control. Exile those auras at the beginning of your next end step. If those auras would leave the battlefield, exile them instead of putting them anywhere else. Yeah, so that's an interesting ability. 3 mana for a 3/2 with haste is like costed to see play, right? It's not like terrible stats. It's not impressive stats in and of its own right. The ability does have to be useful, but if you have a deck where the ability can be good, it is going to be a good card.
Yeah, kind of the interesting in this is it's sort of to really break a card like Storm Herald. I feel like you have to be doing things like discarding auras to cheat costs in. That's something that this could do pretty efficiently. So Storm Herald, kind of to be really best up, asks that you have some discard tools, and some auras that cost like 5 or more mana that you can really end the game with quickly once you return them. And I feel like those two things are kind of pulling you in pretty different directions because you also need to have some creatures in the meantime. Creature decks want to be played early ahead of the discard spells, but the discard spells want to get cast before the Storm Herald. I just think this card there's a lot of kind of moving pieces going on with this.
What's the 8 mana +10/+10 trample annihilation 2 Eldrazi conscription? Is that the one?
Yeah, that's the
That's
one.
not in standard, but that's like the dream, right? You just like get to annihilate for 2 and then get so much damage. It'd be like 13 damage just by itself.
Yeah, so Storm Herald is kind of a weird card where like this one seems more likely to see play in Pioneer than in Standard to me, because I just don't know if we have the elements to make it anything more than like I put this card in a deck with auras just as a way to like get myself some value back if my earlier creatures and auras get blown up in combat or killed by removal. So
Yeah, I think you're right. Like the context of the ability depends on the power of like what you're putting into play. It's like kind of a similar card to like Through the Breach, right? Where Through the Breach is a card that might not see any standard play at all, but it's obviously going to be great in older formats where the creature that you're putting into play is so good.
Yeah, so I think this one is probably going to be. I think I'm just going to give this one a 1 for the context of Standard, because I guess I haven't seen an aura yet that I am really excited to put on anything that, especially like red, is going to limit that too. Curious Obsession was kind of a standard defining aura. There's a new blue-white Curious Obsession type card, but then you're getting into like a really wonky 3-color mana base, and things kind of crumble from there.
But if you never have to cast your auras, if you're just always bidding them, we do have like Thrill and Standard, right? There are some of those effects. Maybe keep it 2-color. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. It'll be a fun one to play with. It'll be a fun one to brew with. I'll probably do some monkeying around with it, but I don't expect it to get anywhere. I think one is a very safe bet for this card. Um, I'm gonna give it a 2 just because I will be monkeying with it. Some cards that look like they're only meant to be completely casual or like only played in other formats or only EDH cards end up actually like proving themselves. I think like 5 colored Niv was one of those cards, right? Not that I
Yeah.
think Storm Herald is that, but I think there's a offside chance that it could be. So I'm hedging my bets a little bit.
No, I agree. This card could definitely have that approximate that much value as a Niv can if your deck is really built to maximize it and everything does line up.
Mm-hmm. Next, wait, what does community say? Real quick. 2. Okay. All right. They're with me. Storm's Wrath, next card. 2 red sorcery, deals 4 damage to each creature and each planeswalker.
Yeah.
So the thing that stands out to me about Storm's Wrath is it is the same color as Fires, and there are some Fires decks that don't necessarily have good sweepers in their colors, and now they're like always going to at least have Storm's Wrath.
Yeah, I think this is like the good sweepers in standard before Theros, basically Deafening Clarion and Kaya's Wrath, right? And there are lots of decks that are red but not white. So I look at Storm's Wrath and I see, this card seems like a big upgrade for like the Teamer Reclamation decks. Could be really interested in casting this. It could open up Fire's decks to be not always just red and white as some of their base colors. This could be like a Teamer Fire card. And I just think that I don't know. I think this compares pretty favorably to Languish, right? Except it has both the downside or upside of hitting Planeswalkers too, depending on how your deck is constructed. So I think that it's actually pretty interesting, really powerful, and I'm actually really on board with this card being a 3 because there's a lot of creature decks in Standard that have everything die to 4 damage. It's Questing Beast, basically everything but Rotting Regisaur, or maybe Knight of Ebon Legion can be tough to get sometimes. But this checks a lot of boxes.
Sure. Yeah, I mean you're probably not playing this in your mono red aggro deck. And so like and red isn't like necessarily a super controlling card in general, but the fact that we already have a deck that this slots into fairly well, the fact that we already have that archetype, and then there's a couple of different color combinations for that archetype. I think I'm with you. I'll give it a 3. Chat, what do you think? What is the community rating on Storm's Wrath? Also a 3. We all agree. It's locked in. We're just correct. We're just right at that point, if everybody agrees. Tectonic Giant, 2 red, creature elemental giant. Whenever Tectonic Giant attacks or becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, choose 1. First ability, Tectonic Giant deals 3 damage to each opponent. So not too shabby. It's similar to the old dragon that we used to have, right? The 2 red 4/4 that every time a dragon you controlled got targeted, just auto dealt them 3 damage. Except there's another ability. You can also choose to exile the top 2 cards of your library. Choose one of them until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. So if dealing 3 damage to your opponent isn't very relevant, like say they're still at their starting life total, you're not very close to burning them out, you can still get value off of the Tectonic Giant ability.
Yeah, I think.
Also note that this is whenever it attacks, right? So you're probably gonna have the mana to use those cards when it does trigger.
Yeah, pretty interesting card to me. It's kind of the sort of card that I look at and just assume is giving your opponent the choice of these modes. But you actually do get a pick, and the fact that it has the clause that if you get targeted by a spell, it does something is really going to mitigate the fact that it doesn't have haste, right? It doesn't do anything immediately, but it does still guarantee some value back even if it dies. So I think it actually I'm already sort of coming up on this card in terms of how I evaluate it. The flexibility is awesome. I think that it's going to be, if you're playing a red deck, it's going to be hard to find a situation where you care about neither the damage or the potential for some card advantage. So
yeah, one way you could look at this is that it's attacking for 6, right? So 4 mana, it like could be a 6/4, and if you only want to attack for 3 and draw cards, that's great too.
Yeah, so I think this one's solid. I think that Tectonic Giant's maybe biggest weakness is the inability to really line up well against like a Teferi bounce. That's still a really important thing in Standard, but the toughness is relatively high. It's a flexible card. I think this is a 2, but this is a 2 that can definitely run away with some games.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I was gonna give it like a week 3, but the downside of being bounced by Teferi without getting any value whatsoever is a pretty huge downside. The 4 toughness is also a little bit weaker than I would like if we just get this new sweeper in the format that deals 4 damage to each creature that everybody wants to play. So having a 4 drop that doesn't deal the damage to the opponent immediately, it doesn't have haste, and then also just like dies to the sweeper that they want to play on their turn 4 doesn't line up super well. So great card, powerful card, a lot of nice ability. The community is giving it a 3. I'm gonna give it a 2. You're gonna give it a 2. But yeah, 3 also not a bad rating. I think if this was a different format, I think if those considerations didn't exist, I'd be giving it a 3 here. It is a powerful card for sure. Next card, Underworld Breach, 1 in a red for an enchantment. Each online card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost, plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. At the beginning of your end step, you sacrifice the Underworld Breach. Darby, what do you think about this?
Oh man. So this is one of those cards that, we talked about the aura haste creature that is, could be better in older formats than in standard. This Underworld Breach is almost certainly way better in older formats than standard. I actually, it goes from like kind of a easy kill condition in Legacy to a card that I don't even actually know how we're supposed to play, like get any value of in standard. You only get it for 1 turn, right? So basically, I mean, I guess I could look at Underworld Breach as a way to enable a flurry of burn spells to end the game. If you're casting cheap things like Shock or, Skewer the Critics, that could be interesting, but I kind of have a hard time knowing how to use this card.
I think there's a certain, and I think that appeals to a certain type of player, a certain type of brewer. Like they see a card that's this complicated and has that wonky of a drawback, and they're like, "I will break this card. I will ruin my F&M opponents, and they will rue the day that I resolve Underworld Breach." And I think that's its home. I'm gonna give it a 1.
Yeah, one for standard, and could easily get banned in some eternal format or cause something else to get banned. So yeah,
Maybe
really kind of
selling
interesting
3 other cards from your graveyard. It's a pretty steep downside. It's hard to flash back too many cards on the regular. It is enabled by Brain Freeze. You can Brain Freeze yourself and then reach back some things relatively easily. But I'm not holding my breath. When it first got spoiled, a lot of my chat was like, "Yo, you seen the new Yogg Will? My card's busted." And I was like, "Oh, sweet, a new, yeah."
Eh,
But I've been
it's
wrong
like
about that sort of thing before.
yeah, definitely like a Kmart brand Yagma Swill, or maybe I should say generic brand to avoid anything. Kmart doesn't have a legal department anymore, right? We should be fine.
Mm. Did we get the community rating? Did we get the community rating on that? 5. A lot of people love this one. A lot of people hyping it up. All right, all right. Well, I should note the community ratings are not taking averages. So if 2 people thought it was a 5, and then everybody else rated it one of the other numbers, it's gonna show up as 5. Maybe I shouldn't be telling the community this. There might be some vote manipulation going on, but yeah, just for context. Ox of Agonus, 3 red for a creature Ox. When it enters the battlefield, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. I already love it. Escape for red, exile 8 other cards from your graveyard. So the escape cost here is leveraged on the exile. Like you're exiling a ton of other cards, but the actual mana that you're spending is very, very efficient. Only double red. And then Ox of Agonus escapes with a 1/1 counter on it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
this
I think this,
is
no, go ahead.
it's interesting. Kind of, does a lot of things. Like it can enable, I guess in standard, it lets you fill up your graveyard if you want to do like red black graveyard matters stuff, with like Timurit Calls the Dead and some of those other cards. It can be the top end of a mid-rangey leaning aggressive deck, that lets you kind of refuel. You cast Questing Beasts into Ox, and then you have a lot of stuff to work with. And it also does seem like it could have some potential combo implications, right? If it's if something you can cheat into the graveyard regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those abilities appeal to me. The first ability reminds me of Bedlam Reveler, right? Didn't Bedlam Reveler see like a little bit of standard play when it was
I'm not
around?
I'm not sure if it saw a ton. It's definitely, Bedlam Reveler and Ox are both cards that I do think kind of, scale better into older formats, with decks with more, a higher
The,
redundancy of discard spells and
the
stuff like that.
upfront cost of Ox, the 5 mana, seems a lot like what Bedlam Reveler was being cast for when it was in Standard. Is because like it was pretty hard to make it cost less than 5 once you were already there, right? Once you're on 5, so it was relatively easy to have like 3 spells in the graveyard, but it was hard to have many more than that in Standard. The escape ability here is real interesting, but exiling 8 other cards is a pretty steep cost. You're gonna need a lot of cards that do a great job of just like putting a ton of cards into your graveyard.
Yeah, and I think one thing about the Ox is you're kind of, I think you're getting a lot of what you're signing up for with this card is sort of the come into play effect, right? If you look at the body by itself, a 4/2 for 5 mana, it's definitely pretty well below rate. So I think that's going to definitely push it more away from like the truly fair decks into sort of like making it a really critical engine piece for a little bit more of a degenerate strategy or a deck that's trying to do those sort of things. So I think that's going to sort of limit its scope of options down to the point where I think I would give it like more of a 3. Like it's definitely going to be a staple in the decks that are capable of playing it, but I don't think it's really going to like have a ton of bleed over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking about Bedlam Reveler, I mean, there's some differences here, and those differences might be huge. I have been impressed with Escape when I've seen it. It looks like this is the flashy like red Escape card that's supposed to wow us and brew around it and like have it be like powerful and stuff, and it is definitely powerful. It's harder to say if it's actually going to see play or not. Discarding your hand and then drawing 3 could be fueling your other escape cards, right? If you're actually discarding cards, there might not be much of a downside there. Usually you want to like almost empty your hand before you were to trigger a card like that. But with Ox, maybe like discarding 3, drawing 3 is just like a really good thing to be doing. That can
Yeah.
make it better than it looks. I'm going to give it a 2, but it's very hard to evaluate. I could definitely see this being much better than that, right? Like I could see this seeing play in like all the formats. I could see this and if the right shell was there, I could see this certainly doing well in Standard.
Yeah, I think it's gonna have a really big impact on like modern dredge as an archetype. That deck's lost a lot of key pieces lately, and Ox really kind of supercharges it.
Oh yeah.
But I think for a standard application thing, I think it's gonna be much more tame.
Okay, so since we're doing a standard review overall, I'm guessing you're going to give it less than a 5, even though it does look like it's going to see play in multiple formats.
Yeah, I think this one's probably. I'm willing to give this one a 3 for my my standard evaluation.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I might be underselling the Ox. What did the community think? What do we got here? Also a 2. Okay. Yeah, that's one that might come back and bite me. I could see that maybe underestimating that one a good deal. It looks so powerful though. So powerful there. Next card, Perforos Bronze Bodied or Bronze Blooded. Sorry. 4 and a red, legendary enchantment creature, God, indestructible as long as your devotion to red is less than 5. It's not a creature. Looks like it's 5 for all of them. Other creatures you control have haste, great ability, great static ability to have there, very aggressive. And then for 2 and a red, you can put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, sack it, beginning of the next end step.
Yeah, so kind of a pretty modern day incarnation of sneak attack. Pretty iconic card, and I think Perforos is. My struggle with this card is it's an interesting god because this is kind of the first one that you seem to be wanting it more for its activated ability than the fact that it is a large creature that you can use, in your monocolor deck, which is interesting. It's going to make it, I think, more high variable when you play it. If you're using it to put in like a Drakaseth onto the battlefield, if you just have the Perforos and don't have any creatures to put in, it might just be a dead card. Where Heliod or Thassa might be able to have some attacks for 5 in a regular game. And Perforos also, it costs so much to play and activate that I'm not necessarily sure if you're even getting that much of a mana discount for some of the best creatures that you could be cheating into play into standard. But I'm a little bit more, kind of like mid-rangey oriented with my card evaluation. So I don't know. Do you see anything pretty crazy to do with this, Caleb?
Yeah, it's kind of nice. We've been talking about fires with a few different other cards, and I do think this card plays well in a fires shell, where you can play it as your first spell with fires, and then you can activate it, get a free creature into play, and then like have another spell lined up. Fires plus Perforos plus the Red Cavalier also turns on the Perforos to attack. Red Cavalier has some redundancy with Perforos's. All other creatures you control have haste, of course. That said, all creatures you control have haste. Is really good with fires, right? So like having that redundancy isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, no, I think this card's going to see play, and I think it's going to see play in fires decks. And there could be a mono red devotion deck that's like a little bit worse than the other devotion archetypes, similar to what we saw last time around. I don't know if you remember, like some people did play with mono red devotion. It was, like wasn't quite as good, but it was still kind of playable. It was still good enough because there were some payoffs for it. Might
Yeah,
see that
yeah.
as well.
Last time around, it was kind of interesting too because it was sort of just like a variation of like an aggro deck that was a little bit slower, and this Perforos kind of leans in a bit of a different direction. So yeah, I would be curious to see. I could see like a big red mid range deck potentially using Perforos to curve into some other like we saw some mentions of like the Boar God, being hasted off of Perforos and letting you have a really messed up turn 6. So yeah, there could be ways. I think it's going to be interesting in fires, mostly just because there's so much competition in that deck too. We actually saw Oketra pop up in a few deck lists for that last MCQ weekend of this current standard format. So if Perforos can break in through that kind of clump of really powerful cards, I think that would speak a lot to its power.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm giving this one a 3. Um, could be wrong. Could be wrong. Of course, this is just our first impressions of these cards, but that's what it looks like to me. What do you think?
I think I'm going to say a 2. I'm definitely the least impressed by Perforos so far, just because a lot of the decks that you might put it in, maybe besides fires, seem like I don't know if they could really come together. But I do recognize that this card can it does something that's very very powerful for standard. So you have to respect that at least.
Note that when you have a indestructible god, when your card is actually indestructible, the toughness matters a whole lot less than the power, and the power on this one is 7. It is a very aggressively priced power and toughness wise. So it's likely that Wizards realized that the abilities on it are a little bit wonkier. That it's a little bit harder for Red to get up to 5 and have the card be relevant still, and so they made it a little bit more powerful stats wise because of that. Anyway, what does the community think? Do we have the community score? We do. They also say 3. Yeah, it's in that range, right? It's in that 2 and 3 range. We'll see. See if it ends up doing anything. And that's going to wrap up our red section. Overall, as the red master, where are you giving red?
Uh, I'm a little bit bummed. I think red is pretty close with blue when it comes to like I think they're the two worst colors we've seen so far. I do think the Phoenix of Ash is pretty exciting. I think Ox of Agonis could have some really powerful things happening, but there's just not much depth here, nor is there that much power. So it seems like a rough kind of set of cards, but red is also a color that gets a lot from commons and uncommons, right? The lightning strikes of the world. A lot of those core components come in at the lower rarities. So this isn't necessarily saying red isn't getting anything, but it's not necessarily getting any, I don't think, premier cards from the new set.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that evaluation. I like the comparison to blue. Just looking at our ratings, it seems like we had multiple ones in red, and we had multiple ones in blue as well. So if you're going to do like an overall rating of the colors, putting red around near blue at the tail end of the colors we've looked at so far makes a lot of sense. Yeah, a couple of exciting cards. Not that there's like mono duds here, right? Like you said, the Phoenix is interesting, the Ox is interesting. Uh, Certainly some stuff to be excited about. Next color coming up on white. No, just kidding. We already did white. Green. Do you so as a red mage, do you dip into green at all?
Yeah, I think that like if you tune into my stream on a random night, there's probably like a 40% chance I'll be playing Gruul. So there's they pair pretty naturally. I think green is definitely hard to avoid, especially with how good it was in Throne of Eldraine. So yeah, I think the color's sweet. Really a lot of natural good beatdown cards in it. And actually, I think some really interesting and powerful cards that I'm excited to talk about here coming up in the first couple rares.
And green has been dominating standard lately. Like the last couple of sets, last couple of pro tours, last couple of what have you, last couple of ban cycles, right? We've seen a green sideboard card get banned in standard in Veil, and we've had like a filtering instant and Once Upon a Time get banned. So green is on top right now. Green has been crushing, and hopefully we both get something exciting for green here, and then maybe slightly less exciting than it was in Theros.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for hype, but not that much hype.
Yeah, just give me some good threes, give me some
Yeah,
cards that I
give
can
me some
play.
threes, maybe a solid four, maybe less fives. Maybe we don't need all fives. All right, let's check this out. Rasta of the Endless Web. 2 green green. Legendary enchantment creatures Spider. Reach. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/2 green spider creature token with reach. And it's a 3/5.
Yeah, this card's kind of interesting. I don't know exactly how to rate it because there are some decks that if you resolve a Rasta, basically they have to cast a sweeper to get back to parity, right? This really punishes cards like Opt. It punishes cards like Growth Spiral, kind of cantripy type things in the later game. It's a cool card, but I don't think it does enough immediately, nor is it large enough to really be a centerpiece. So I think this one might be a one with like the potential to really punish, a very small number of decks.
This art is sick. This art is really cool. I love all those little spiders and stuff. That's gonna creep some folks out for sure. Some phobics out there. Yeah, 4 mana for a 3/5 with reach is like pretty good blocking stats. Green isn't always into blocking, but sometimes it is. I remember the last time we were dealing with Constellation. I remember some creatures with very large butts that didn't actually do very much saw play just because they were enchantments. They triggered Constellation. They blocked really well. They gave you time for all of your value engines to like take over, of which they were a part. It's got reach in and of itself, which is nice. And then yeah, if it like triggers ever, I think that's where you're playing this, right? You're playing this in a deck where you just want some enchantment creatures to fill out the ranks, and if it ever triggers, you're fine. You're like happy with that. It could be a sideboard card for more aggressive decks. It doesn't line up well against Questing Beast at all. It looks horrendous against Questing Beast, so it's not blocking that one super well. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I agree with your one, but I don't know if giving it more than a week two would be anything. I'm gonna give it a week two.
Yeah, it's been hard because we haven't seen too many cards that really heavily pay you off for constellation matters yet. We haven't seen any like Eidolon of Blossom or even like Doomwake Giant level, I think, constellation things. So, if they're even if we get like two cards that give you real solid effects for triggering them, I think then all of a sudden Rasta becomes like if it's in those colors, then yeah, great. We can play this card. It does enough. But in the absence of those type of effects, I just don't know if like the 3/5 for 4 with these abilities, will make standard.
Fair enough. Solid evaluation skills there. What does the chat think about this one? We have the three. Put it in three. A little bit higher than we rated. Well, spider.
Oh,
Thank you, little
spider.
guy.
All right.
That's a cuddler.
I'm gonna get
All
some of
right.
those for my Innistrad cube.
Ooh. Dryad of the Elysian Grove. 2 and a green enchantment creature nymph. You may play an extra land on each of your turns. Lands you control are every basic land type, in addition to the other types. 2/4. What do you think?
This card seems, I think, really good. It accelerates you in a not necessarily a way that generates card advantage, right? It is sort of arboreal grazerish in that way. But when I look at this card, I think of Nissa, right? It lets you cast Nissa ahead of schedule. It blocks and protects for it, and it also turns all of your lands into forests. So it gives you basically any range of 2 mana interactive spells after you untap a land with Nissa, which is, in my experience playing the card, what most directly leads to wins, right? Nissa, untap, Aether Gust, game's over. So another thing about Dryad, it's a second chromatic lantern if you want to play Niv Mizzet, the 5-color one in standard. I think that might actually be relevant too. So this card does some really powerful, albeit kind of narrow things, and I'm actually super high on it.
Cool. Yeah, I think you covered everything. I think you covered all the regular talking points. Yeah. Um, the fact that it doesn't actually give you value, right? Like some people mistakenly compare it to like Corsair Crucifix or Oracle or what have you. It doesn't actually give you that value is kind of a downside. It is rare that a card that like only fixes and doesn't ramp you or doesn't come into play with value actually sees play. But if it does, I mean, it's gonna be this one, right?
Yeah, I think Dryad really kind of puts your card advantage cards in a really good position to be enabled ahead of schedule. To really go crazy. But yeah, Dryad by itself isn't going to win you games necessarily, but I do think it's going to kind of smooth the path and just kind of speed your deck up by a turn to get to your real top end. So I think it's yeah, I'm interested in it. I think I would probably rate it a 3. I think it's another one of those cards that I think will completely revitalize like traditional Valakut in modern. I think that's something that's worth talking about a little bit. Um, it's definitely to scale back well too.
Yeah, and the play next additional land plays well with Amulet, but Amulet probably doesn't need help with the colors, right? The reason it's interesting with Valakut is because then you can combo off with Scape Shift like a full turn sooner, of course, which is why Valakut has played the one in the green enchantment version of that. Do you remember the name of that card?
Uh, Prismatic Omen, I think.
Yeah, that one. Um, and this is like a prismatic omen that you could potentially tutor for with Summoner's Pact. Maybe as a one of.
Yeah, so I think this card's pretty sweet. It's definitely a card that I think will enable a whole another set of brews, and I actually think that I don't know. I'm really excited to try this one out with Niv Mizzet in particular.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I like your reasoning. I like your analysis. I do think this is the sort of card that tends to be overrated, especially when there's not value attached. And so my instinct is to like naturally hedge against that and rate it lower, with the understanding that I could very well be wrong. And I do like your analysis as well. So I'm gonna give it a 2, but I'm prepared to be incorrect. But this is the card if I was gonna read it, I would expect it to see fringe play later down the line, just because of the lack of value attached, right? The fact that it's not ramping us. Community agrees with you. Not surprising. 3 stars. A lot of people like this card. The first Irwin Games, 2 and a green. First ability, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Second ability, put 3 1/1 counters on target creature you control. Third, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw 2 cards. And 5, create a gold token.
I kind of feel similar to the first heroine games as I do about that Crone War card. It's just really kind of finicky sagas do not really excite me, especially this one has real potential to be blown out by removal. If
Quick
you're,
question: how did you feel about History of Bedalia?
I was pretty in on that one.
How do you feel about drawing 2 cards?
It could take it or leave it, but I suppose I'll not bad.
As a saga ability, as just like part of what a saga is doing. So you're right that a removal spell is good here, but I mean the 3/1/1 counters don't have to be targeting the 1/1 that's like easy to kill with a removal spell. Just the fact that you get your 4 power creature, potentially draw 2 cards. I mean your whole deck's gonna be full of 4 power creatures if you're playing this card, right? There's gonna be other things turning it on. Lovecraft, Love Struck Beasts, and what have you. And this card could just run away with things. I do have another question. Are you familiar with gold tokens? What do those do?
I think they're just treasures. They're just treasures by another name.
Okay. I mean, we have one here we can look at real quick. Sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana. Yep, just a little treasure. Yeah, so gold tokens probably not that relevant. We do have 5 stages to this saga, which is, or I'm sorry, 4 stages. Usually they only have 3, right? So this is
Yeah.
a little rare in that regard. Um, no, continue.
I think my value, like for first heroine games, basically, if you're casting this on turn 3, I think that to make it really consistently be great is you kind of have to play a 4 power creature on the following turn to kind of give yourself some insurance against the blowout, stopping the third chapter draw 2. And I guess after thinking about it a little bit more, that's not necessarily something that's that hard to do, nor does it really inconvenience you to cast a card like Questing Beast on turn 4 or both sides of Love Struck Beast, like you mentioned. So I guess first
Ah,
round
shucks,
games,
I'm playing creatures that attack, right? Yeah.
yeah. So I think that it's probably going to be a little bit better than I'm giving it credit for. It's just that like as a standalone card, if the rest of your hand isn't necessarily coming together, this can be rendered pretty ineffective in a lot of ways. So I guess that's probably going to push it up towards a 2 for me, a card that can definitely dominate a game, but also a card that can get pretty close to dead.
I mean, a 3 mana green card that dies to a removal spell uh covers like a whole lot of green cards, right? It covers a whole like the dies to Doomblade argument. You are right that the real payoff with this card is not necessarily creating a gold token on turn. What is it, like 6 or 7? Whenever that finally, like, getting like one more mana on turn infinite, but rather drawing 2 additional cards on top of whatever creature you generate is the real payoff there. So like making sure you can do that consistently is like really key with this card. But I mean, if you're making a card and you're drawing 2 cards, that's pretty busted. That's usually like a Muldriftery ability, and you're, in this case, you're not like evoking Muldrifter on 3, like you're generating the 4/4 and then also getting your cake and you're eating it as well, right? You're getting the 4/4 and you're drawing 2. You're beating down, and they can answer your creature, and you could still end up drawing cards anyway, potentially. I like this card a lot. I'm gonna give it a 4.
Okay, yeah, a bit of a gap in between us. I think Aruan Games does have some nice kind of subtlety to its gameplay. If you're doing something like playing Gruul with this card, putting 3 counters on a creature can enable a lethal Embercleave. Definitely much more ahead of schedule than your opponent might expect. So there's some other kind of cool things to do with it. But yeah, I guess I'm kind of excited to play it out though, because this is one where I think the early gameplay is going to be pretty telling.
Oh, absolutely. It is weak to sweepers, like most cards that care about creatures. A lot of times when you're doing these like early format reviews, you only have your own play experiences to go on, right? We haven't actually seen these cards in play yet, and our views could change very drastically even after just casting a card once. Mantle of the Wolf, 3 and a green, enchantment aura. Enchanted creature gets +4/+4. When it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, create 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. What do you think, Darby?
So I guess this one is I don't know. It kind of gives you some hedge against the natural downside of auras, right? If your creature dies, you do get just as much power and toughness as the card was granting, but in 2 wolf form. I guess where you could kind of get got is classic when you're casting the mantle. In response, your opponent can kill the creature and it ends up being pretty bad. I think that like the risk inherent in this is too high, and the competition amongst other similarly costed green cards is too high for me to really expect this one to see any amount of play.
It kind of reminds me of oh man, I'm so bad with card names. There was a 2 and a green uncommon that something of the centaur, maybe, I'm not sure, but it would give +3/+3, and then if the creature died, you would get a 3/3 token. And that one saw a play, but that was also like way back in the day. And there's been some power creep since then. But this card's very similar, right? You get +4/+4, and then when the enchantment dies, not necessarily the creature, when the enchantment dies, you get the 2/2 tokens. So if you're sacrificing enchantment specifically, that becomes a little bit more interesting. Um, maybe playing that 3 mana 3/2 that can get enchantments back from your graveyard too. Then you're like attacking for 7.
Yeah,
If they're
this
pump
is
enchantments, you could be like kind of aggressive in that sense. Maybe,
kind of the
maybe.
first aura that I've seen so far in our set review today that seems like it's going to pair well with the Storm Herald. But I think I'm still low enough on it to be comfortable giving this card a 1 and be I'm willing to be surprised later if it does end up making a case.
For sure. Yeah, chat was pointing out Elephant Guide was the card that I was thinking of. Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 2, but I think 1 is a safe bet. It's a safe bet as well.
And it looks like community pretty low on auras, giving this one a 1.
It's safe. It's safe to be low on auras, right? But if you're dealing with a format where enchantments are a thing, and there's like some specific cards referencing auras, then I think there's like a slightly higher chance of it being useful than otherwise. There's also hexproof creatures that can make that sort of thing a little bit better than usual. There's the Wolfie. Nessian Boar, 3 green creature boar. All creatures able to block Nessian Boar do so. Whenever Nessian Boar becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller draws a card. We have a 10/6. First thoughts?
Uh, I guess it takes all the bad parts of that 4 mana white sweeper and puts them on a big pig. I don't know. I guess the boar like Embercleave comes to mind first with boar as a way to like steal a game, but I just I don't know. I guess I can't really imagine finding a situation where I'm really super excited to be playing this card.
Yeah. Yeah, Nessian Boar, not great. Not a good one. 5 mana for a 10/6. All creatures able to block it do so. And then that's already starting out like, okay, well maybe you can give it haste or something, maybe it becomes interesting. But the fact that if your opponent has to chump this, they're still drawing cards, they're still getting value. You're like drawing your opponent into an answer to the Nessian Boar is what you're doing with its ability. Anytime you've got a card that says your opponent draws cards, it's probably not good. I'm gonna give it a 1.
Yeah, I'll give it a 1 as well. With I guess so. Here's my caveat: if your opponent is just playing a deck that can't produce any creatures, it's basically going to be, if you remove the downside in that way, it could be all right. But that would relegate it to like a sideboard card against a control deck that doesn't really exist at the moment. So, yeah, pretty easy one for this pig for me.
Community rating also chiming in with a 1. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes the piggy. All right, Nelia's Intervention. X green. Sorcery. Choose one. Search your library for up to X land cards. Reveal them. Put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. Or Nelia's Intervention deals twice X damage to each creature with flying. First thoughts?
I guess without Field of the Dead in standard anymore, I'm wondering what the best utility lands we can search up are. And a lot of them seem pretty middling, I think. You have, I guess, like gates you can get if that's a thing that you care about. But yeah, maybe Field of Ruin is a card that is coming back into standard in Theros that we're not going to have a chance to talk about. But I think this is the worst intervention so far in a standard context, but it does actually have some kind of interesting applications in older formats.
We have the 3-mana 2/4 and lets you like play extra lands. If you're playing a deck that like really wants to hit your land drops, then just like tutoring for X land cards is starting to feel similar to drawing cards, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned gates. There's the green. There's the blue enchantment. That when you play a gate, you draw cards. That's another way to convert all these extra land drops into cards. There's also and I know spiky players tend to like cringe at the term like deck thinning when it comes to lands, right? Because a lot of people back in the day, like there was the fallacy of like, oh, I'll play these fetch lands in my deck and that'll thin it out and I'll have better draws and stuff. And then people actually did the math and you're like, well, the life you're spending is way more important than pulling one land out of your deck. But when you start pulling like a lot of lands out of your deck, like, that's one of the reasons that Primeval Titan is so good. And it's worth playing even in like Vintage Cube and stuff, even when you don't have good lands to go get. It's just like pulling lands out of your deck, ramping you and like juicing up your draws is quite nice.
Yeah, and I think that it's competition against not Nissa's Pilgrimage, but Nissa's Triumph kind of makes it a little bit tough because to kind of outpace the Triumph, you have to be spending 5 mana, and in that case, I would really be needing to get some. I think some kind of powerful utility lands to be willing to do that.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that reasoning. And then there's, of course, the ability that we haven't mentioned at all, which is dealing twice X damage to each creature with flying. I've played Hurricane in Standard before. I've played deal X damage to flying creatures as a sideboard card before. I'm going to give this one a 2, just because that strikes me as a sideboard cardish type of thing. If there's a deck that's leaning hard on flyers, this is an answer. It's a sorcery speed answer, but it's also an answer that could go get, those important utility lands, like we were saying.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say 1 for standard, but it does some cool things in modern, even legacy, fetching both halves of the Dark Depths combo by itself, kind of cool.
Oh yeah, well that's super cool. And then EDH players are going to be very very excited about this one, right?
Yeah. Sylvan Scrying on steroids.
Citizen Champion, 2 and a green for 1/3 Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on Citizen Champion and draw a card. See, now you said there weren't any Eidolon of, what is it, Great Blossoms? Was that?
Yeah, and Citizen Champion does a pretty damn good impression of one. The only difference being that it doesn't necessarily give you a card back when you cast it itself, but the trade-off that you get is a much larger body and a discount on both the overall mana cost and the green requirement. So, this is kind of doing a lot.
Yeah, I think if there's going to be a green constellation right out of the gates, this card almost has to be a part of that, right? It's getting huge. It's doing like a tireless tracker type thing where it's growing with each payoff and drawing cards at the same time. The front end doesn't have like the same base stats as tireless tracker, but yeah, if the cards you're playing are doing things, then it's a little bit better than like just drawing a card for each land drop and spending mana on it, right? Like you're spending 2 mana with tireless tracker on each card you draw, whereas with this card, just any enchantment you play is automatically, like as a passive effect, drawing you cards and growing your champion. I think this card's quite good. And yeah, if there is a constellation deck, I think it's going to be a key part of it. I'm going to give it a 3. Watch Constellation just be like the best deck in the format, and it's just like a clear 4, and I feel like a dumb. But that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say 3 as well. It's just kind of, I do like the play on this card, and that like if your opponent casts it on turn 3, there is a pretty good chance that if you don't kill it, you will be impossibly far behind for the rest of the game. But if you do, then the game's kind of back at parity, and your opponent hasn't really gained anything of value. So I think that's a nice balance to walk. It makes the card, I think, kind of vulnerable enough to justify its high power level. And yeah, I would kind of put it as a 3 too, because while it is definitely going to be a staple in any Constellation archetype, if this is the best card in your deck, having that big of a downside, I think is going to naturally cap the overall power that the archetype could have.
Yeah, Eidolon of Blossoms was like, and there's the community rating at 3. Eidolon of Blossoms was kind of messed up, but a lot of that was because it always at least drew 1 card. But 4 mana made it kind of clunky for the 2/2 body. It was easy for aggro decks to just not care about it. This costing like, and it was like harder to get rolling in those matchups, right, where the opponent's applying a lot of pressure. This card costing a full mana cheaper. I do think the pros and the cons are like very nicely balanced, being a little bit worse against control decks because you're not getting immediate value, but then getting better against decks that care about speed. Yeah, anyway, nice little card. Next card. Nylea Keen-Eyed, 3 and a green for a legendary enchantment creature. God, indestructible as long as your devotion to green is less than 5. Nylea isn't a creature. Creature spells you cast. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so it is ramping you if you have a lot of creatures in your deck. Then for 2 and a green, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it in your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard.
So here we see another kind of graveyards matters card, kind of, I guess when I look at Nylea, I kind of imagine like, all right, so this is kind of cool, but I want to piece together a curve of Paradise Druid into Nylea into most messed up thing we can do. Is kind of how I imagine it, and it's nice that it has some slow drip card advantage on it, but I guess I'm still kind of putting Nylea closer towards the Ereboses of the world, and definitely like I think this one is still clearly worse than like Heliod as an example.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to match up to Heliod. Just the fact that one costs 3, right, just gives it a huge leg up.
Yeah.
I think that's valid. The ability is real nice. Being able to put the stuff into your graveyard is pretty nice with escape, and then the ramp ability is a little bit better than most ramp spells. It's a little innocuous, right? So like creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. You're thinking like, oh, this is only just going to ram me once per turn. You're playing multiple creatures that can generate multiple mana in a turn. It's really, really nice.
Yeah, it is a pretty insane mana sink when you have, this is a good situation anyway. But if you are untapping with Nylea and Nissa, you kind of, can never really run out of threats if you combine those 2 cards. So Nylea in some ways might serve as like a functional extra copy of like a Hydroid Crisis, right? This is my, a card that I can't necessarily deal with multiple copies being drawn all that well. I really kind of only want to have 1 per game, but it is another mana sink, and it is occasionally a pretty, relevant threat on the battlefield if that's what I'm interested in doing. So yeah, it seems fine. I guess I kind of put it at more of like, okay, role player god, and probably closer to like, I would probably put it as like a weak 3 is my personal rating.
Yep, you compared it to Erebos. I like the comparison. I gave Erebos a 3. I'm giving Nylea a 3. What does the community think? Where are you at, community? Also a 3. We all agree. Next card. Nyxbloom Ancient, 4 green. Enchantment creature, elemental trample. To have a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times that much mana instead. That's a 5/5.
How do you feel about Hydroid Crisis X equals 22?
I've played some large Crasises. I don't know if you can actually play too large of a Crisis. I don't know if that's a thing you can do.
Yeah, this one's kind of, I feel like cards like this never see any standard play. But right now we have the mix of like flexible payoffs like Hydroid Crisis and Finale of Devastation that actually like can go crazy with Nyxbloom, but also do something before you're getting to 7 mana. So that's one part. There's also like enough just acceptable ramp in the format, to make this kind of interesting. Also elemental. So Risen Reef, Omnath, stuff like that, is extra card here to play with. but I'm still, I think, pretty low on the possibilities of this one really being a standard player.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I like all those considerations you threw in. The issue is that 7 mana is when you want to start playing your ramp payoff, and this one's like a 5/5 trample is not really a ramp payoff. It's kind of just more ramping. At a certain point, like X being like this huge number versus X being infinite is like kind of similar. If you untap with it, you basically have infinite mana, but it's a 7 drop, so
Yeah, sort of
omniscience
already have
costs like
infinite
8,
to
but
get
doesn't have a
there.
5/5 attached. What?
Yeah, it's just to cast Nyx Blue Ancient. You're sort of approaching the territory where everything is functional anyway. So yeah, I think this one is probably. I think I'm going to give it a 2 out of my respect for the power of the ability. Um, but I would not really be shocked if this card put up like 0 top eights in any standard tournaments in its lifetime.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 1 based on the last part of your evaluation. I don't think it's gonna see like any top eights in standard. This is like a standard thing. Maybe no play is wrong. Maybe that is wrong. But in terms of mythic, maybe it is. Yeah.
And it's like communities agrees with the 1 there, and looks like that is the last green card. So kind of an interesting color. I don't know how to feel about this. I threw out a lot of 1s here. I guess since you feel a little bit higher in the archetype, how would you kind of describe the cards we saw?
Yeah, you threw out like 4 1s. I still threw out a lot of 1s. I still threw out multiple 1s as well. Um, yeah. I felt a little higher on the archetype, but not that much higher. Our main point of disagreement was the first hero in games, where you put it as like a 2 and I put it as a 4. I think all of the other ones we either like matched ratings or we're only like 1 point off. So yeah, I'm excited to play that card in particular. And there's like a couple of other cards I'm excited to build around and brew around and stuff. But it doesn't seem like green got a ton. It's probably about where red is in terms of there's a couple of exciting cards. It's probably not gonna dominate the format from these offerings, but who knows? There are a few like archetype specific cards that we saw, cards that like if this archetype is good, then this card is just gonna be all over standard because it's gonna be clearly very important to that. But yeah,
And honestly, like I don't know, I'm feeling some green fatigue. So if it just takes a set off of having any like marquee cards, I can't really complain about that.
you'd appreciate that a little break, a little break.
And I'm still gonna die to Lovestruck Beast attacking me like for the next 3 months anyway. So yeah, green
You can
kind of
have a
I think
small
already
break
has all it
as a
needs.
snack. All right, bam, multicolored. Yeah, so we just did like a little bit of a green overview. I don't feel like asking you your thoughts on multicolored stuff in general. Like we did a little bit of identity talk with all of the other colors. Doesn't really make sense with multicolored as much. But what about wedge? Do you have a favorite wedge?
I think probably Jeskai for me. I played a lot of that when I first started to get into modern, many years ago, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's just I don't know, kind of hard to break away. I guess white red something. Naya is also pretty high up for me. I know you
Oh
mentioned
sure.
Grixis earlier.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Giving them Grease's cards. Oh man. So a card that I'm sorry, a game, a gaming moment that I had once was tripling up a Cruel Ultimatum in the Legendary Cube by untapping a Pyromancer's Goggles with the legendary land where you could untap any legendary permanent. Usually you only use that with creatures, but in this case the goggles did the trick, and so I got to use 2 Pyromancer's Goggles. Usually very hard to do because it is a legendary, so it's hard to get 2 red Pyromancer's Goggles for a Cruel Ultimatum, but it happened, and it's just going to help me sleep well for the rest of my life. I'm the most Grixis in that sense. But here we are. We're in multicolored. Let's see what multicolored offerings Theros Beyond Death has for us. First card, Allure of the Unknown. Some beautiful Seb McKinnon artwork there. One of my favorite Magic artists. 3 black red for a sorcery. Reveal the top 6 cards of your library. An opponent exiles a non-land card from among them, and you put the rest into your hand. That opponent may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. What do you think, Darby?
Oof, real bad.
Oofta.
I think I kind of look at Allure and it's like, all right, how do we make this really good? And I kind of see it as like a big card advantage spell for a fires deck maybe, but like then you're giving your opponent like Cavalier most of the time, and I just don't see it.
Yeah, me neither. Uh, I was asked over the weekend. I was asked, what kind? When do you play this deck? When do you play this card? And I guess like if your deck's really bad, then you're giving your opponent one bad card and then putting five bad cards in your hand as this card advantage. It's just great. Now this card's atrocious. Anytime you're like giving your opponent your best thing and options, right? That's not ideal. I'm gonna give it a one.
Yeah, I guess if your deck is like 35 lands, if you can realistically whiff on giving your opponent a spell,
The
that's
red black 35 lands. Let's go. Let's go. All right, what does the chat think? And did you agree with one? Is that
uh, I'm actually gonna break my own rules and put a 0 in this one, just as a one-time exception. But
it's not, well, you can't do that. It's a 1 to 5. It's not your rules. You can't. Darby's a 1. Write him in for 1.
I don't know.
Atris, Oracle of Half Truths. 2 blue black. Legendary creature, human advisor. Menace. When Atris enters the battlefield, target opponent looks at the top 3 cards of your library, separates them into a face down pile and a face up pile. Put one pile in your hand, the other into your graveyard. First thoughts?
This card, it just seems amazingly fun to play with. I kind of love the old hidden information sub games. When they come up. When I look at this, I think like here precinct one, and also yeah, maybe a body that's a little bit too small to be like a premier main deck option, but it does a fine job of hunting down planeswalkers with the menace. And you can basically always get yourself 2 cards of value if you're willing to potentially like take a bit of a risk.
Yeah, I've definitely done a bit of what we would call like fact or fiction drafting. I'm sure there's another for it where like the person splits up your pack into like one pile, the other pile, and then like you can only see one pile face up, and you have to decide if the face down cards are better when you're drafting. Like do that in a circle. You can do it with like 2 to 4 players or whatever. It's pretty fun, pretty fun way to cube. And this card reminds me of that. And it is a lot of fun. Like you said, it seems like a really fun card to play with, and it is. It's a blast on both ends of it. Like you have to do the sub game is like is your opponent trying to trick you or not. One very interesting part of this ability is that the other pile goes to your graveyard. So if you're filling up your graveyard, and there is a very important graveyard based mechanic in this format, then it's just all value, right? You got cards going to your hand, you got cards going to your graveyard. The 3/2 body with menace is not bad for blue black, right? For you consider like the colors that it's in, it's Dimir. I'm sure for a Gruul mage like yourself, the stats are not very impressive, but I like this one. I'm gonna give it a 3. I'm gonna play it a lot.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna say 2. Mostly just because I think the body's holding it back, but I do think that it's gonna be like an incredibly solid sideboard card. We haven't actually said this very much today, but like a sweet thing to bounce with your own Teferi, for really really sweet cascading value if you're into that sort of thing.
I am. I so am. I am on board with that. What does the community think? 3. He also likes to dirtle. Also on board with that. Oh, we didn't mention the blue god. The blue god blink in that one.
Oh, hot damn, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Bronze hide lion. 1 green, 1 white. Creature cat. Green and white gains indestructible until end of turn. Very useful little ability there. And then when it dies, returns to the battlefield. It's an aura enchantment with enchant creature you control. And green white enchanted creature gains indestructible until end of turn. It loses all of their abilities. So it's a 3/3. It can like live forever so long as you've got some mana up to give it indestructible, and then when it dies, you can have it be an aura to get that ability to something else.
Yeah, I think this card's sweet. It really does kind of call back to Fleecemane Lion. And when comparing the 2 cards, I think Fleecemane Lion has a bit of a higher upside. That activated ability gave hexproof and indestructible. Your Bronze Lion is still vulnerable to like bounce effects or exile effects, but it's still a 3/3 for 2 mana. That's an okay rate, and especially one that can kind of attack with impunity or play around board sweepers is going to give it a lot of play. So I think Bronze-Eyed Lion is a solid 3 for me. If there are aggro decks that can cast this card, it's going to be in them, and it's also going to give some interesting redundancy to like Fleecemane Lion decks and Pioneer. We might see there might be a Celestia deck that can pop up there eventually because they have like 8 Watchwolves now.
Yeah, I was kind of down on this card at first, but probably just because I'm a Grixis mage. There's the aura side of it as well, right? Where if you care about constellation, it will trigger it when it dies. That's kind of interesting. All right, I'm with you. I'll give it a tentative 3 as well. What does chat think? Where's chat on this lion business? A 2. Yeah. Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
For me, I guess every card in this particular section is going to hit this mark. But I was building some hero decks that had white and green in them, Hero Precinct 1, and just seeing a playable card that makes a free 1/1, man. I'm kind of desperate for that, so I'll rank
Sure. Yeah.
accordingly.
It's Fleecebane Lion was a card where I was like, so you have to spend 5 mana and then it gets 1/1 counter. Don't you just get blown up by a removal spell? Like I was like really unimpressed when I saw it, and that card just saw infinite play. So here I'm seeing a card and was like, well, is that even something you want? And I'm just like, yeah, probably. I'm probably just wrong in the exact same way again, with a very similar card. All right, Delacos, very frustrating to get rid of potentially. Delacos, Crafter of Wonders, 1 blue, red, legendary creature, Merfolk Artificer. Taps for 2 colorless, spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate ability of artifacts. It says equipped creatures you control have flying and haste. It's a 2/4.
Kind of a cool and powerful effect, but I don't necessarily know what we're using to, what this is accelerating into. Like, I don't see even really many parts of his shell to make this crazy. Although I guess Colossus Hammer is still in standard, right? And it says something for that.
Don't we already have something similar to this at the uncommon? Just the 1 in a blue 1/3 that can tutor for those janky artifacts, like the specific ones.
Yeah, the bow and something else.
Right, and also taps for 2 colorless. The important part of both cards seems to be tapping for 2 colorless mana for artifacts. This one has the added bonus of equipped creatures you control have flying and haste, which is nice. Yeah, Renowned Weaponsmith, that's the name of the card I was thinking of. Which is useful. It's a useful ability, but I don't know if it's going to be a breaker, right? I don't know if that's going to suddenly make the card constructed playable. I'm going to give it a 1.
Yeah, I feel comfortable giving it a 1 as well, but with the caveat that when you start stacking effects like the one that Dalakos has and Renowned Weaponsmith has, you do kind of, get closer to having a real deck if you can increase those density of ways to actually
do things more consistently, yeah. If you just like always have that.
But I still think always having Renowned Weaponsmith is like probably worse than always having a random basic land in your hand. So maybe that does a good sign that the rating should be a 1.
Oh, someone said flying Regisars with the with the cleave and stuff. Could be brutal. Dream Trawler, 2 white, blue, creature Sphinx. Flying lifelink. Whenever you draw a card, Dream Trawler gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Whenever it attacks, draw a card. And discard a card, Dream Trawler gains hexproof until end of turn. Tap it.
This card definitely shades of like Prognostic Sphinx from back in the day. A large, sort of not ideally sized flyer that can get some. In Prognostic Sphinx's case, kind of virtual card advantage with Scries. Dream Trawler actually just does straight up put you up cards. And the nice thing about it is the whole flying, lifelink, and hexproof combo is going to give you a lot of game. As a way to both slow the pace of the game down against beatdown decks and also start to pull you ahead when you need to. So I think Dream Trawler is pretty capped by its mana cost in terms of how many copies you can actually put in your deck. But I wouldn't really be surprised to see control decks play like 1 or 2 of this just as a way to properly end the game.
Yeah, comparing this card to like Baneslayer Angel, I think it compares favorably. It doesn't die to Doomblade. It's got flying, lifelink, and then the whenever you draw a card, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So if you're attacking with the Dream Trawler, you untap, you draw, it's a 4/5. And then whenever it attacks, you draw a card. So now you're attacking, now it's a 5/5. You're like hitting them for 5, gaining 5, and drawing an extra card. Well, that's so important. It's not legendary, so you can have multiples in play. I mean, it's you're right that it's capped by its casting cost. Only blue-white decks can play this with the white, blue there. But I don't think playing 4 of this card is crazy. In the right shell. You're having multiple extras?
Nah, I think it's like a solid 2 is my particular ranking, because I just the mana cost is kind of shaking me a little bit. But I do think that it's something that I'm interested in at least trying to cast some of it in my blade control decks.
It's a 6-drop finisher that does not get bounced by Teferi. and that's sweet. Even if they try, it even like fizzles the ability so they don't draw a card. It's super cool. I'm into it. I'm tempted to give it a 4, but I'm gonna give it a 3. I think that's more realistic.
And curious to see what the community says on this one because yeah, it's one of those things where I think people who like Dream Trawler will really be trying to cast it pretty hard for its entire standard lifespan.
Mm-hmm. Community agrees with you. I think it's more of a niche card, niche role player. Enigmatic Incarnation 2 green blue enchantment. Beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, search your library for a creature card with convert mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrificed enchantment's converted mana cost. Put that on the battlefield. Shuffle your library. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, there's some tension here. The fact that it asks you to be invested pretty heavily in enchantments and also creatures is kind of an interesting strain, and really does make you want to maximize the number of enchantment creatures in your deck naturally, right? Because they can work both ways. But when it comes to birthing pod effects in standard, they are pretty infrequently good, and most of those have fewer or less kind of costly restrictions as the incarnation does here.
Yeah, it's interesting that we have like a pot effect for enchantments. There are a few enchantments that specifically benefit from being sacrificed and ending up in the graveyard and stuff. One of the cool things, one of the cool lines I saw with this card is involves the green ley line. So you can like turn 0 green ley line, turn 1 goose, cast this on turn 2, and then already on turn 2 sacrifice the green ley line and go get a 5-drop creature. I mean, that's kind of nuts, right? Isn't that like a sick god hand? I mean, it's 3 cards, but
Yeah, that is a actually pretty absurd sequence. And I guess beyond that, if you're if you think of like enchantments to sacrifice for value, we could circle back to like treacherous blessing. The 2 black draw 3 thing that lets you sacrifice it up to a 4-drop, where you have a lot of pretty
you
powerful
can
options.
go get another incarnation.
Can you? I thought it was only getting creatures.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
My bad. It only gets a creature. You're only sacrificing enchantments, and you're only getting creatures, which makes deck building real tricky. Except when you're dealing with enchantment creatures, right? Because they can be on either side of that. So you probably do want to play some number of enchantment creatures just to like make sure that you have enough creatures and enough enchantments for this card to be consistent.
Yeah, so I think it's a cool card. I could believe that it's also one of those cards that is going to get better as the standard card pool does continue to expand, right? After we get Ikoria and the next core set, incarnation could gain some stock as it has some more tutor options. But I think right now I'm going to give this card a 2, and it's weird because like it should probably a 3, right? If there's an archetype, this card is going to be the centerpiece of it, but it still seems hard enough to pull off that I'm willing to bump it down to kind of niche territory.
Yeah, I'm giving it a 2. I do intend to brew with this card. I think it'll be a lot of fun to but it's going to be hard to do much beyond that, right? I don't think it's hard to see a card like this and peg it as being like, yep, format staple, going to top 8 some tournaments. Very, very tricky when you have something that's wonky. But yeah, it'll be fun, super fun. What does chat think? Chat rating 3, rating a little bit higher than us. Gallia of the Endless Dance, green, red, 2/2 legendary creature, satyr, haste. Other satyrs you control get +1/+1 and have haste. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may discard a card at random. If you do, draw 2 cards. So nice little lord effect. Going to play with haste is already pretty sweet. How many satyrs are in standard? Do we even have any?
I don't know if there are any before Theros. So it's always tough to make a tribal deck, off of only 1 set's worth of material. But I was looking at this and like I've cast enough Zertog goblins as a 2/2 haste. To like think that this card on that mode isn't necessarily completely out of playability range, but I think
so like, oh sorry.
I think it like yeah, not looking like a great prospects for the endless dance, unless there were some sweet satyrs that I missed on this kind of my trek through the spoiler.
I like the Zertog Goblin comparison, right? Like, just having a 2-mana 2/2 haste, ignore the satyr part. When you attack with your main creatures, you can discard a card at random, draw 2. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's good enough. You're not going to play 4 because it's legendary, but playing 1 or 2 in your Gruul aggro deck, maybe pretty sweet. Way to grind back some cards. All right. What do you think?
I think that this one, I think I'm gonna give it a 2, but it's a bit of a weak 2 in my estimation because I don't think we're really gonna get there on the tribal stuff. And Surtog Goblin feels a bit generous to be given a 2 as well. You know, kind of shaping up with these other rares. So seems okay. Maybe some
Surtog
play.
Goblin's seen a lot of play.
Yeah, yeah, and you know the fact that this always dies to like Bone Crusher Giant could be a problem. I know that's a card that is kind of a big thing in standard right now, so it's got some interesting implications. But I'm a little bit medium on this one.
I agree with you. I also gave it a 2. I was just playing devil's advocate there a little bit. What does chat think? 3? It's an exciting card. Look at how happy she looks. Yeah. Also, like you pointed out, it could get better. So if we're doing like a standard set evaluation, standard changes, more satyrs get printed, tribe becomes more supported. Who knows? I think this card's really interesting. Haktos, the Unscarred, red, white, legendary creature, human warrior. Attacks each combat if able. When it enters battlefield, choose 2, 3, or 4 at random. So one way to do that is just to like roll a d6, and 1 and 2 counts for 2, 3 and 4 counts for 3, and then 5 and 6 count for 4. Like pretty easy to do, just with a die on the table. And then Hextos has protection from each converted mana cost other than the chosen number. 6/1.
Ooh, what a problematic card. You know, like the variance and how good this is going to be from game to game is kind of wild. Like, let's say you're playing against like Jund Sacrifice, right? And you roll a 3, and it immediately gets shot down by a Mayhem Devil Pig. Like, that kind of sucks. But sometimes you roll a 4, they have actual nothing in their deck that can interact with that, and they die in 3 attacks, you know, and you win the game very easily. I feel like that kind of makes it tough for me to really peg what this is going to actually impact standard as. But I mean, protection is a really messed up, powerful mechanic, and this card has the ability to have protection from your opponent's entire deck, depending on how the roll goes.
Yeah. I mean, it is a legend. Usually, you don't want your 4 drops to be, I don't know, too legendary, especially if they've got like protection. So like this one's just like not dying. But I mean, imagine if you could play multiples of these and shut off multiple.
Yeah, I think that's I don't know. Hacto seems kind of it seems like it actually could just be kind of great to me. But it's hard to actually ever like lean into this card in a really serious tournament setting because like you know there will be games where it gets stomped by a Bone Crusher Giant and the mana exchange is really bad. And it is worth pointing out that some of those adventure creatures are actually kind of good against Haktos because they can be played at multiple different converted mana costs to get around it. That could be something that actually matters if Haktos is a relevant card, and also a lot of devotion pips, you know, in a couple different ways if you care about that. So worth noting as both an upside and a downside.
It is pretty cool with Embercleave. That 6/1 body becomes a lot more reasonable if you're going to give it +1/+1 and double strike and trample. Yeah. So I don't have a lot of hope for it. Just the mana cost versus like the variation. And like you said, like a lot of times this is going to get stomped by a Bone Crusher Giant, which is not really what you want out of your 4-drop. We'll see. We shall see. I'm gonna give it a 1 for now, but
yeah, I
Force
think
aggro's a thing. Could show up. It could be good out of a sideboard against like a random control deck. Like good against some of the removal.
yeah, I'm gonna give this one a 2 with the understanding that there will be a kind of a lot of games I think where if you play it, it will play out more like a 4 or 5 in terms of power level, which is just kind of the variance that you sign up for with this one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody pointed out that you can't actually equip this with Embercleave. I was misreading the last ability. Haktos has protection from each converted mana cost other than the chosen number.
Yeah, it doesn't really care where the
that changes my reading too. I thought it was getting protection from the chosen number. Just misread that last line.
Oh yeah.
That's
the
why we
fact that
do
it can't be touched by anything else is really kind of game breaking sometimes.
Yeah, that drastically changes it. This is why we do set reviews, right? You get the added the extra eyeballs, the other people reading the card, doing evaluations. It happens a lot at pre-releases where like both players read the card. Like if your opponent like tells you what a card does and you haven't read the card yet, you should probably read the card yourself because there's a high chance they're wrong when you're dealing with new sets and new cards and what's. Just read it, verify the evaluation. Hectos has protection from each converted mana cost other than the chosen number. So yeah, so sometimes it's going to get stomped, but a lot of the times it's not going to get stomped. You'd have to like 1/3 of the time. It's like the only time that they'll actually be able to kill this.
Yeah, so it's I don't know. I was kind of close to giving this one a 3, but
Some of
it's
the sweepers don't even hit it, right? Like the damage based sweepers
yeah,
have a really good
yeah.
chance of just not being able to answer it, and then creatures can't really block it, right? I mean, some creatures can obviously, but you can. It's a lot easier to handle like one creature that can block your thing instead of like a bunch of creatures that can block your thing.
Yeah, so I definitely heard some True Name Nemesis comments floating around, and I think the big difference is this thing is kind of all set in attack position, right? So that does mitigate it quite a bit. But yeah, I think this.
It's not True Name, but True Name's like an all star in Legacy, right? And we're dealing with Standard. The mana cost is trickier than True Name as well. If you're gonna like further that comparison, like a lot trickier. And of course, because it's a legend, you can only have one in play. But I was like, yeah. But for misreading the ability, I thought the ability was like kind of like weaker situational. The ability is actually quite strong, isn't it? Boros is gonna want to be attacking too. I think I'm gonna give it a shaky 4. Just dramatically reverse my earlier decision. I don't think a 3 is out of the question.
And I think that's fair. For me, it's just for playing this card, like registering Hectos at like a Grand Prix or a Pro Tour, it's just hard to have it be a core part of your deck when like sometimes it's a card that'll do nothing. And I think that might actually suppress its play a bit at the higher levels, whether that's justified or not.
Only 1 in 3 times, and then they also have to have the spell that kills it, right? Like if you imagine your opponent only has like so many removal spells at 2 and only so many removal spells at 3 and so many removal spells at 4, and then they actually have to like draw the right removal spell depending on the roll. It's just I don't know. A lot of things got to line up for this to just get cheesed. You can't live in fear. You can't live in fear. All right, next card. Kunaros, Hound of Athreos, 1 white, black, legendary creature Hound. Vigilance, Menace, Lifelink. Creature cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast spells from graveyards. 3/3. Where you at, Darby?
I think it's just a nice little card. It's some graveyard hate against the Cauldron Familiar combo. It's gonna stop escaping. There's gonna be I think a lot of escape cards coming out from this new set. Pretty solid against aggro. 3/3 doesn't die to the shock effects. It's got vigilance and lifelink, so it's actually it's kind of got that questing beast style, powerful racing ability. And yeah, I don't hate it. I think I see it as like a very good sideboard option.
Um, yeah, I mean, you get 3 minutes for a 3/3 with Vigilance, Menace, and Lifelink, and that's a lot of abilities. Anytime you're dealing with just like a lot of abilities, things start to you read those second abilities, right? And you're like, oh, so this is really good against cards that want to come back from graveyards. So you're like your brain locks it into sideboard option. But if a card can hose entire archetypes and it's just good on top of that, and like those are good abilities, and if your deck wants like a 3/3 with Menace and Lifelink, that's really hard to race. That's super hard to race. So you're hosing graveyard decks and you're hosing like reddish aggro decks because those decks are going to have a hard time blocking this because it's got Menace, and then it's also like like bricking their 2X's because it's got Vigilance and it's got Lifelink on top of that. So it's a hard card to race for its stats. And then yeah, like with the hosing action, I think this card's very very good. I think it's going to see play in multiple archetypes, and I think it's main deckable. It is legendary. It is Azorius, right? So that's going to hold it back. But I think that's the only thing holding it back.
Yeah, no, I think I'm pretty comfortable giving this card probably a 3 is where I'd be happy with it. I think that where the metagame's at is kind of going to determine where it ends up if you're starting it or sideboarding it, because there are some decks that go well over the top of the Hound. Like if your opponent's casting Fires of Invention, it just isn't going to do enough. But yeah, I think it's a nice card to have in standard. I just think it's cool to have some extra avenues for extra colors to fight against the graveyard.
Yeah. It's possible. I think that escape's going to be more of a thing than you do, and that's like part of the difference in our evaluations. Or like maybe I'm looking at it as an eternal player than a standard player. But I think this card's going to see a lot of standard play, and I think it's going to see a lot of play in a lot of other formats as well. I think it's more than a sideboard card. I'm gonna give it a 5. I'm gonna disagree. That's all right.
Second
That's
5.
okay. It makes
All right.
things more hype if there's some disagreement. If we all disagree on all of the cards, And it's not very exciting, is it? And the community agrees with you. Community also agrees. It's a 3. Next card. Anytime you have this like word salad thing going on, the chance things are just quite good.
It does confirm that.
What?
Sorry. It does confirm that more heads on a card directly translates to more abilities. So
right. Questing Beast also has three heads. This one has 3 heads. Ashiok Nightmare Muse, 3 blue black legendary planeswalker Ashiok +1. Created 2/3 blue and black nightmare creature token with whenever this creature attacks or blocks. Each opponent exiles the top 2 cards of the library. So you can block with this immediately. It doesn't necessarily need to live through combat or even deal damage. And you're going to give the exile 2 cards effect, which is important. Because let's see, the second ability is return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Then that player exiles a card from their hand. So the second ability also exiles the opponent's cards. And then the ultimate is you may cast up to 3 face-up cards your opponent owns from exile without paying their mana costs.
I kind of really like the design of this card. I'm not really, I don't really think it's particularly powerful, like not overly so, but it does a really good job of combining what Ashiok has been the last couple times, right? Like it does care about exiling. I do like the -3, gives you really a lot of flexibility in what you're interacting with, but also gives your opponent some ability to counterplay by holding some extra dead cards in their hand potentially. And I like that it protects itself with the 2, 3, and 6 loyalty. So I feel like Ashiok is going to be a definitely role player planeswalker, closer to like an Ob Nixilis in terms of its amount of play, as opposed to a Nissa. But I still think there's going to be some spots for this, and I think it's going to be like somewhere between 2 or 3 for my rating.
Upticking to get creatures is like such a like a green or white thing for a planeswalker, right? Is this like the first time we've seen blue-black planeswalker? I guess the black gets like its zombies a lot of the times. It's interesting. It's super interesting. I like the -3, how you return a non-land permanent to the owner's hand, and then they exile a card from their hand. It reminds me of like Recoil. That card was always a lot of fun. The thing about that is that if the opponent's hellbent, it's like more than a bounce spell, right? Like you're actually just exiling whatever card you want to target. You can get them to a hellbent state, which is very Dimir. It plays very well there. I think this card's good. I'm gonna give it a 3.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable giving it a 3 as well here. Something that you'll see it as a probably 2 of in a couple different decks. I'm excited to play with Ashiok a little bit. And one thing that's worth talking about is you can also use that -3 to reset your own things if that need ever arises. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you can replay a card that gets you more value than you lose by exiling a card to bounce it.
Yeah, community rating is giving it a 4 there. I don't think 4 is crazy. I don't think 4 is crazy at all. Could end up just being really good. The uptick's nice. Anytime you have a planeswalker that upticks and creates board presence like that, it's real nice. And the ultimate doesn't even take that long to get to.
Yeah, no, I think that it does a good job, both protecting your planeswalkers and hunting down your opponents. And there's definitely big chunks of time where that's like most of what Standard's about. So yeah, it could be a huge player.
Next thing, let's say Nightmare. Whenever this creature attacks or blocks, each opponent exiles the top 2 cards of the library. It's the one that we saw. Nice to have the token have the actual text of the ability, though. It's harder to screw it up. Calyx, Destiny's Hand. So I read this card, but I do not remember it at all, which is not a good sign, but maybe that's just, maybe my eyes just glaze over with the Celestia cards. 2 green-white legendary planeswalker, Calyx. +1, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an enchantment card from among them. Put that card into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. -3, exile target creature enchantment you don't control until target enchantment you control leaves the battlefield. So you need to have an enchantment in play for that ability to be used. And the -7 is return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield.
So this Calyx is interesting. I think it's a good card if you have like a wealth of good enchantments in Standard that you are capable of playing in white green plus one other color, right? But the list of enchantments that I'm really excited to put into my deck, actually, I feel like it dries up pretty quickly once you get past like the Banishing Lights or the Doom Foretold or Treacherous Blessings. Like, I'm not sure exactly what the math needs to be to have like good hit rates on your +1. But if you're drawing like half a card to turn off that plus, I'm not necessarily super convinced by this card.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting this in a Constellation deck, right? The 3 mana 2/3 is also not an enchantment in and of itself. But this is another sort of payoff thing. You're gonna have some enchantments that are removal. You're gonna have some enchantments that are fixing and acceleration, and you're hopefully just gonna have enough playables. That's kind of what when I was like evaluating the spider earlier, like 4 mana 3/5. Not the best ability, not doing like a whole lot, but just the fact that it's an enchantment creature makes it a lot better for effects like this, where you just like need bodies to fill up the ranks. So just have like enough enchantments for this archetype to be playable. And that's where this card's gonna be, right? Like if that deck is viable, this card's gonna be in it. If it's not viable, then it's not.
Yeah, my estimation is this card definitely seems like a two. Like it is a pretty powerful two. In that it will dominate some games that you play it in, but it just seems. I guess I guess after looking at all the rares, or most of the rares at least, I'm not really quite sure we have enough to really make me want to go down that constellation route quite yet. So I think that's going to lead me to be a bit lower on Calyx.
Yeah, I don't think two's crazy. The fact that it's like only going to be playable in that one deck means that I'm going to give it a two as well. It's not going to like just slot into like any deck in these colors like a lot of planeswalkers might. But I do think it's good in that deck, right? Uptick, draw card. Like you're pretty much just doing that, right? Uptick, draw card, uptick, draw card. The fact that it can downtick to exile something, even if it's more situational. What are the odds that a green white enchantment deck has an enchantment? Probably pretty good, right? Building your whole deck that way.
Yeah, and
Anyway,
I think it's kind of I guess the one thing that would make me, if that -3 could be just closer to an Oblivion Ring, like get any permanent off the battlefield, I'd be really interested. But the fact that it's capped at creatures or enchantments, kind of limits its versatility in a way that like the Ashiok -3 wasn't limited in. And that extra functionality is worth a lot in a standard that has like threats like Embercleave that you'd like to get rid of, or Witch's Oven, or not just
mhm.
creatures or enchantments matters.
Also note that the -3 is really awkward against a fairy, right? So it has to be attached to a specific enchantment. And they're like, all right, bounce thing. Oh my god, I spent so much loyalty on that. Yeah. So ideally, you would be playing this just to draw cards, and not like green and white draws a lot of cards, so might just be what you play. What does the community think on this one? Two, yeah, all right, lower one. Clothis, God of Destiny, one green, red, legendary enchanting, God, indestructible as long as your devotion red and green is less than 7. Clothis isn't a creature. At the beginning of your combat main phase, exile target card in the graveyard. It's a lane card, add red or green, otherwise you gain 2 life. Clothis deals 2 damage to each opponent, or 5.
I think this card's kind of bad, to be honest. The variation of, or the red green decks that we've seen in standard have cared a lot about attacking, and like attacking with your creatures. Ideally, the turn you play them, at the minimum, the turn after you play them, right? So you can't really spend turn 3 on casting Clothis because it's very difficult to have it actually attacking the following turn. What it's doing in the meantime is, I think, kind of minimal. There's a good chance that if you play it on turn 3, the graveyards won't be particularly stocked, and even if they are, accelerating a little bit solid, the drain and damage is, the drain's okay. But I see this as like, yeah, just not really exciting for me at all. And also asking for devotion to 7 um, means that you have to work a little bit harder to get this god turned on, as opposed to the monocolor gods. You need 5 additional pips instead of 4, as another kind of unfortunate thing.
It's possible that it was the devotion to 7 is because it's a much cheaper planeswalker that has these like recurring abilities that are happening every time. It's also possible that it's got to be scaled like that due to Burning Tree Emissary and Pioneer, right? Like it might just be really easy to get up to like 5 loyalty, for example, in Red, Green, and Pioneer. That format already has people playing like turn 2 Realm Masters. They'd be able to play this on turn 2 very, very easily. I'm kind of high on this card. Uh, Sulfuric Vortex just kind of like sits in play and domes the opponent for 2 every turn, and is just like it's the strength of it is that it's just like really hard to deal with, right? There is the advantage of your opponent doesn't get to gain life. That's like the really backbreaking part of Sulfuric Vortex, but the worst Sulfuric Vortex is still very, very, very good, and that's I think how I evaluate this card.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna give it a 2, and be willing to be wrong on it. I guess just I might be Might be a card that kind of reconfigures how you build, your red green decks with it. And even though it doesn't fit necessarily easily into the ones that have existed in the past, doesn't mean that that can't be changed. And it's like a card that you want, like it's a fine sideboard card for Gruul. It gives you a way to stop Cauldron Familiar from blocking, your best creature turn after turn. So it's going to have some relevant sideboard applications and matchups that Gruul might have had some problems in, but I don't necessarily think that this would be a card that I would main deck a lot of.
And it's just constantly exiling and like if escape is good enough, then it's just gonna keep on exiling, keep on damaging anyone that's trying to do some kind of graveyard based deck. And yeah, like you pointed out, the food deck has some graveyard interactions. So if you can stop them from recurring for a turn or something, you can exile some cats that way. Not very likely, but you could do it. If they're draining you with the cat over and over, like the life gain on this is important as well. You're probably not ramping very often with it. Not at least not in standard, but the fact that it can ramp in older formats where you just like always have fetches in your graveyard. Yeah. I am also willing to agree to be wrong, especially because my rating is very pie in the sky. I'm gonna give this a 5. Just the most pie in the sky ever. That's all right. That's all right. I can dream big. I can dream big with this one. Yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of situations where I see myself wanting to play this and seeing it doing a lot of work. Community has it on 4. That's more than I was expecting. That's more than I was expecting on this one. It is like I think a hard card to evaluate, especially without playing it and like seeing it in play with all those different abilities that are all doing different things.
Yeah, I just have very kind of sad memories about how difficult it was to turn on the 7, devotion requirement gods the last time around Theros. So for me, it's if I also get this card through the lens of it's going to be a 4 or 5 creature like 60% of the time, that would probably skew my rating even up a full point. But I'm not
Oh,
even
if you
sure.
thought it was if you thought it was easier to turn on, yeah.
Yeah,
We do have we've got that stupid 4 mana 5/5. It's like a hybrid, right? That giant.
yeah. You just need Clothis into giant. You just need one other thing on board, and you're attacking that
Yeah,
turn.
right.
So
I'll just beat him down. If only the giant was somewhat reasonable. If only. Maybe if you get
yeah.
haste or something. I don't know.
I mean, giant can't be blocked by like knights or walls. And last time I checked, the tier 1 of standard metagame was Jeskai Fires, knights, and wall tribal. So yeah, I mean, maybe we'll find.
Yeah, there's a really good chance I play with this card, and then I'm like, nope, Darby was right. It's a 2. I'm silly. But yeah. Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. Black red, legendary creature, Elder Giant, 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. Whenever Kroxa enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card, then each opponent who didn't discard a card, or didn't discard a non-land card this way, loses 3 life. And then escape is black, black, red, red. So when you first play this card, it's not sticking around, which would be insane. It's a 2 mana 6/6. You can turn off the comes into play ability. Um, there is the 1 and a white 1/2. The Hushbringer, is that the name of the card?
Yeah.
And then you just have so if you have like the nuts Smardu curve where you play Hushbringer on 2 and then turn 3, you just have a 2 mana 6/6. I guess it's a thing you could do. But it seems better to just play it, let it go to the graveyard, and then bring it back with escape and have your 6/6 then.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting card. It very naturally slots into the sacrifice decks to me for a bunch of reasons. You play Kroxa with Mayhem Devil in play, you do get some extra utility off of a ping. Midnight Reaper lets you draw a card as your opponent's discarding a card. If you have a Witch's Oven in play, you can sacrifice Kroxa for multiple food, and still get the effect. That can be pretty solid. And a deck with sacrifice stuff built in should be able to get its graveyard to the point where you can have 5 things to escape out of. And what they actually missed on my first reading of Titans is that they do this every time they attack. That's a little bit, I think, less relevant for Uro than Kroxa, but still, I mean, it's just like ripping your opponent's answers to shreds before they can necessarily get to their real like top end of the curve. It adds a different dimension to the sacrifice decks, and that like it is the first creature that can attack and dominate without any sacrifice energies necessarily. I think that's important. I think this card seems really good.
Yeah. Obviously, just like playing it with no additional value, like the first time, and then never getting it back. You're just like spending 2 mana to make the opponent discard, which is not ideal. But you're probably not just doing that, right? You're probably playing it at least to get value to get the oven value, like you mentioned. could slot in really well in those decks. I'm gonna give this one a 3.
Yeah, I agree with the 3. This one takes a lot more work to be great than the other Titan Uro, but I do think that it really kind of checks out of the boxes in the context of the deck that you are going to put it in. I can't recommend like building red black mid range and just like playing 4 copies of this, but if you have 12 plus cards, it can really let you get something more than just the discard when you play it and have it get sacrificed. Then I think then you are really kind of cooking with gas.
One nice thing about the community rating thinks it's a 4. Nice. I'm pretty hyped about the Titans. I'm also very high on the Titans in general. One nice thing about the fact that it sacrifices the first time you play it is you can draw multiples, right? And then if you already have a Croxit in play, you can still fire off other ones to go into the graveyard, get some value, get some direct damage in. If they're discarding non-lands, or if they're not discarding non-lands. Anyway, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff going on. It's not a hard one to play 4 of. It still might not see play as 4 ofs just because it's not really useful until you're escaping. So maybe you want to play fewer, but it is interesting that you're not as punished if you have multiples. Anyway, next card. Lycranos Unchained. This is an exciting one. 2 green, black legendary creature Zombie Hydra enters battlefield with 6 1/1 counters on it. It escapes with 12. Damage would be dealt to Lycranos while it has a 1/1 counter on it. Prevent that damage, remove that many on it. 1 green black, it fights another creature, and then you can escape for 6, 4 green black, while exiling 6 other cards from your graveyard.
Yeah, this one seems pretty good to me. Part of what I like is that the fight ability is a lot more mana efficient. Last time we saw Pelucranos, that one typically needed 5, 7, 9 mana to actually kill relevant things. Pelucranos can just accept that it's going to shrink and spend 3 mana to kill something. Basically most creatures, right? It's going to be hard to outsize Pelucranos as it is a 6/6. As always, I think cards with escape should be given probably another percentage point or half percentage point more than you think they should, because this ability is worth basically infinite Pelucranos. If the game goes 15 turns, you could have it 3 times and be fine. I kind of like this card a lot.
That's all convincing. That's all pretty convincing. Normally, if you had a 4 mana 6/6 that just dies pretty easily, I'd be kind of down on it. But the fact that it comes back, the fact that it kind of wants to die, makes that a lot more exciting. The old Pelucranos, you would activate it as a mana sink when you had piles of mana and you would kill something, and then the Pelucranos would get bigger. It'd be get too big to handle, and it would become harder to kill. This one, you activate it, and it's trying to die. It's, just wants it to end and get into the graveyard so it can come back larger. Doesn't have evasion. It's jumped pretty easily, but you can also activate it to get the smaller creatures out of the way. I think I'm with you.
Yeah,
where are you on this one? What number?
I think it's probably a 3 out of 5 for me. There are some. It's a legendary creature that isn't necessarily as smooth to use extra copies of as the Titans might be, so that could be a little bit awkward. Black green is kind of interesting color combination in standard right now. Since we had the Oko ban, there hasn't been a ton of decks kind of in that space besides dedicated adventure things, but I think this card's pretty powerful enough to be justified in casting it.
One question real quick. How does its ability interact with questing beasts? Damage can't be prevented. So if damage would be dealt to Pelucranos while it has 1/1 counters on it, you prevent that damage or remove that many 1/1 counters on it. The damage is prevented. Do you still remove the 1/1 counters? Is my question.
I think since the damage can't be prevented, it's taking death touch damage from questing beasts, so it's just dying.
Just dying straight up.
I think that's how that works.
But then it would trade. It would still actually deal the 6 or what have you.
I think they would trade it off. Yeah,
I'm fine with my 4 drops trading. It's all right, especially when mine comes back and theirs doesn't.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure if that works exactly that way. But the fact that it kind of just dominates the battlefield against most other green creature decks, red creature decks. It looks like the fact that it can just trade with Rotting Regisaur or kind of accentuate Rotting Regisaur. Reggie being a card that forces you to discard is going to give your graveyard a lot of escape fuel. Is something that is a way to kind of mitigate the downside of that other oversized black creature.
Yeah. So a lot of times when you have a gold card like this, you're like, okay, well, it's really, really good. There's a lot of cool things going on here. But I'm gonna lower its rating because it's only gonna fit into green black decks, and so it's just not gonna see, even if it sees play in A archetype, it's not gonna see it play all of standard and stuff. It's like restricted in that way. This card, it's possible that it's good enough that it's a draw to play green black. When you have that, I think you get into like solid 4 territory. When people are like actually like warping their colors because the threat is so good because it's doing so much. Because it fits enough archetypes. I don't know. I'm gonna put a 3 on it because I'm a coward, but I could see it end up being a 4.
Yeah, I'm curious what the community thinks about this card because it is.
Louis down on it. Near my
it
cat.
is a little bit splashy and looks like kind of agreeing with the 3 as well. I don't know. I could see this being better, but I can't imagine it being like that much worse. I just think it has kind of so much on the raw stat and power level.
I'm gonna go grab my cat real quick. He's yelling at me, but I'll be back in a very quick amount of time. This happens on my stream too. This isn't unique to this particular stream. We'll back in a second. We'll finish this out. We only have a few more multicolored cards and then artifact to go. But yeah, he's gonna keep yelling at me until I deal with him. Be right back, folks. You can fill if you want.
Yeah, just do a little bit of riffing. Yeah, so to kind of catch people back up, just talking about broad kind of color impressions as we've gone through this set over the course of a couple hours. I am pretty happy to say that I do think white is probably one of the colors that gained the most, and also one of the colors that needed it. Heliod, I think, in my estimation, is the best card in the set that we've talked about so far, at the very least, and it kind of strikes me as the Thassa of the set. You know, it's aggressively slanted. It costs 1 less. It really leans nicely into the life gain matters white beatdown angle that we already have some cards for. Ajani's Pride Mate, Healer's Hawk, that sort of thing. It also can kind of go in white mid range. You know, you could play a slower Heliod game plan with something like Arcanist Owl. You know, find your Heliods more often, turn it around by itself. Just an exceptionally powerful card. And I think the combination of Heliod plus Elspeth and some other like kind of, you know, fine role player type things are actually going to make variations of white kind of break their way back into standard. Beyond that, Caleb and I kind of agreed that black was a color that we were into as well, for a bunch of different reasons. You know, Woe Strider is a card that I think is a little bit, I'm not sure how people are appreciating it right now, because Intuko Husk really was a huge player in standard, instant speed, repeatable sacrifice effects. You can't really underrate. And Woe Strider is the first one of those we've had in a long time. Beyond that, though, some cool, flexible interaction. E2 Extinction, a really clean way to trade like nicely with gods and planeswalkers while filling up your graveyard for things like escape. Also, Erebos' Intervention, really cool removal spell to keep your eye on. A little bit overcosted, but the flexibility to keep other graveyard decks in check in a main deck card, interesting too. One of the downsides of the set, though, blue and red, a lot of duds. A lot of rares that are a little bit underwhelming. You know, in blue in particular, the only cards that really stood out, Thassa does seem like a really high impact, high leverage card that can have some crazy build arounds. You know, Flickering Agent of Treachery seems great. Another Arcanist Owl all-star card. But beyond that, yeah, blue is looking to be pretty mediocre. And I think this is going to be pretty interesting. It's definitely a bit of a step back in power level compared to Throne of Eldraine. But, you know, most sets are going to be that way. So it looks like we got Caleb back. We got the cat corralled. So
cat
yeah.
is indeed corralled. He's been a little feisty because I was gone all weekend. He was like, we left him with a sitter and stuff. So been very clingy. Like, don't leave me again. Anyway, so we have more cards. We have more cards up. We covered Pelucranos. What was the chat rating on that one? Did we get that?
I think that was a 3. Yeah, 3 for Pelucranos.
Okay. Well, kind of agreed. Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, 1 green, blue, legendary creature. Battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Then you may put a lane card from your hand onto the battlefield to escape. Bring green, blue, blue, exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. Thoughts, Darby?
Yeah, 5. I mean, this card's like, I look at it and it's an incredibly powerful effect in a color combination that already had a good ramp deck that was capable of filling up its graveyard pretty reasonably. Uro, I think, is going to be better than Kroxa because its effect is additive. And what I mean by that is Kroxa, you know, it does lose some value if your opponent is, you know, low on resources. If their hand is, you know, irrelevant or empty, that effect isn't doing anything. Uro is always drawing you towards extra copies of really powerful cards in your Simic ramp deck. I think baseline how it's going to play is it will approximate the ramp of a Beanstalk Giant most of the time. and give you a substantially better threat once you get around to casting it. So I
Oh
think
yeah.
Uro is awesome, and I would be shocked if it wasn't like one of the top 2 or 3 best cards from the set.
Yeah, I give it a 5 as well. I do think I mean, this is the card that when I first saw it spoiled, I was like, I kind of want to monkey with this in Legacy. I kind of want to like tweak around with it in Legacy. Blue card, which is the Force of Will. There's a lot of like easy ways to fill up your graveyard in Legacy, get value. There's like Life from the Loam type decks that are just like already doing that. Community agrees, also giving it 5 stars. I'm going to cast this card a lot. Other people are also going to cast this card a lot. This card's going to get cast a lot. Yeah. Seems like we all agree on that one. Card is nuts. Next card. Oh, well, that's it. That's it for the multicolored rares and mythics. We have some lands and we have some artifacts to go into after this. Overall, how did you feel about the multicolored cards?
I thought they were by and large pretty reasonable. We had a nice like spread of 2 color combinations that had cards that I think I'm interested in casting. Highlights for me, not necessarily power level, but just kind of interest wise, are the let's see, what was the Atris, the kind of hidden pile, face up pile of card selections. I think that's a really interesting and cool creature. I also am really excited to try some Ashocks in kind of a more mid-rangey shell. I think that card is definitely capable of stealing games. But yeah, I like how it kind of had a fair bit of power across the multicolor, and I think it's gonna hopefully some of these cards kind of fill out underappreciated guilds from
Yeah, looking at our
round 1.
ratings, we both gave a couple of ones. We both had 1 5. I had fives. I was rating like a couple of these kind of aggressively, just because I think that they're gonna show up in multiple formats. The one that we had the largest disparity on was the red green god, of course, which which I did say that I might be super off the ball on that one. But if I'm right, I'm gonna look like a genius. So sometimes
Yeah,
you gotta take those risks.
yeah. In 2.5 weeks, when the red green god is banned, I'll send you a care package apologizing. So
Oh yeah, no, I don't think it's gonna get banned, but I think a lot of people are gonna get sick of playing against it, which is similar, right?
yeah.
All right, let's move on to artifacts here. Mm, artifacts. The first one that we've got up is Nyx Lotus. Love the art on this card. I think for my next tattoo, I'm actually gonna get the art on this card put on my arm. I've like kind of held off on just like a flower tattoo, but this one's on fire, so that makes it way sweeter. All right, Link's Lotus, four mana for legendary artifacts. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap, choose a color, add amount of mana to that color equal to your devotion to that color. Darby, first impressions.
um, Not my favorite standard, cup of tea. I'm trying to think of the most absurd mana sinks we have right now, and I kind of come Gadwick or like Hydroid Crisis type things. But I think that I wanted to either make some mana immediately, or I don't know, be a land with this effect. Just I actually really I'm surprised we didn't get Nykthos, the shrine, back into standard. I was kind of felt like they were aimless in that direction. But yeah, I'm kind of nonplussed by Nyx Lotus personally.
Nykthos did kind of dominate a standard format. Maybe they didn't want to just like reprint the same standard format again, right? Like here's your pack rat and your gray merchant and Nykthos, and like just do the same thing. Like I think that would have been kind of boring. This there is some pros to this over the land, right? The fact that you don't have to spend 2 mana up front means that it's going to be ramping harder. Um, yeah, I think that's the main advantage. The fact that it's going to be tapping for more mana than Nykthos itself was. The big downside is that it comes into play tapped, of course, so you're not generating mana the turn you play it. Also, because it comes into play tapped, and because it's because it comes into play tapped as opposed to untapped, you're not going to be able to chain multiple together. That was something that you did with Nykthos back in the days. You would activate it, and then you've got this 4 of this legendary land, but you can play a land for the turn break. You can activate and then play another one from your hand and activate that one again. You get like this double explosion of mana. It's not going to be possible with this card. You'll be able to, have artifact synergies, but there's not a ton of those going on. It is the enchantment set. Enchantment's pretty nice with devotion though. They sit around, pump your devotion even when your opponent's playing sweepers. You can play them alongside sweepers yourself. I think this is going to be a 2 of in the hard devotion decks that have curves going up higher. Earlier we had that disagreement on the Blue Saga, right? I think
Yeah.
Nick Slotus
Yeah.
is gonna, if there is a deck that wants a Blue Saga, it's gonna be playing this card for sure. Probably like
Yeah.
3 of it.
I think that's I don't know. I'm gonna be pretty negatively bold and give this Nixel a 1. There could be ways to break it, like especially if there are cards that like untap artifacts, you can start to go really wild. But it's just, the fact that it asks you to take a turn off and also have a reasonable battlefield to see how, hard the ramp scales. Just kind of seems like it's asking a lot for the payoffs that I'm not necessarily sure I could really find, like, off the top of my head.
Someone says, "Why work hard when Nissa does this and kills people too?" Because of devotion, right? Like if you're gonna doing something that's not mono green devotion, then and you still want mana, you kind of can't play Nissa, right? So if you're mono black devotion or mono blue devotion, if you think those archetypes are going to want mana, makes Lotus starts to become interesting. Personally, I like devotion. Saw play in like all of the colors except for like white last time around, right?
Yeah,
It's possible they don't want devotion to be as good, in which case this card won't be, it won't be enough. It'll be like a little bit underplayable. But I do think they want those archetypes to be playable, and that informs my rating here. I'm gonna give it a 3.
right. I'm curious to see what the community says on this one. Inspired by this card is definitely seems absurd in more casual form. I think they kind of split the difference here with the two.
Mm. Shadow Spear, 1 mana, legendary artifact, equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. 1 mana, permanents your opponent's control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and then equip of 2.
Seems so. The first thing that comes to mind with this is imagine like being a tool to use in maybe big green aggro mirrors, right? Putting Shadow Spear on Questing Beast gives it Trample Death Touch combo, which is very nice. Putting it on Lovestruck Beast makes it pretty difficult for people who try to race to actually make that successful. Um, but that's the only thing that comes to mind, and that's like kind of a sideboard card for a subcategory of an aggro deck. So
Yeah, it does. We do have a couple of cards that interact with equipment. Heliod does interact with life gain, so there's like a little bit of something there. Some people like really like the idea of having your opponent's permanents lose hexproof and indestructible. It does make the gods a little bit easier to deal with. You like already have other answers that don't answer the gods, but overall, I agree with you. This is a little wonky. The fact that it's legendary counts against it as well. Like you can't like have it be a consistent answer to gods, right? Like you can only put so many of these into your deck. Have it be reasonable.
yeah, I will say it's
Interesting
one of the
card.
few cards that removes hexproof from Lotus Field. So this card actually might see some Pioneer play. I know there are some decks that are pretty desperate to have a way to interact with that, but you need to make it lose hexproof and then find a way to deal with it. So that's kind of asking a lot.
Yeah. Um, I'm gonna give it a very tentative 2. Because I've just got like a lot of. I mean, there's a lot of words on here. Anytime there's a lot of words, could be good, and it's just really hard to tell.
Yeah, I think this is a 2 in my book, but a 2 that I guess I wouldn't be surprised if it saw no play. But the whole like giving everything lifelink in those mirrors, if you're aggressive, could be solid.
Sure. One to play and 2 to equip though. I don't know. Like would
Yeah.
Loxodon Warhammer see play today if there was Loxodon Warhammer printed? It like
Um.
didn't really
No.
when it was reprinted the last time, right? Like the first time it was around, it like saw some, and then like the second time it was printed, I don't think really saw standard play. Shadow
Yeah.
Spears, like the trample and life link aspect, kind of reminds me of Loxodon. Maybe like a little bit better, but
Yeah, I think there's too many decks where Loxodon just doesn't really do enough of anything. Teferi bounce strategies. There's a lot of decks just go over the top of a single creature with a Warhammer on it. Um,
sure. I
so
guess
yeah,
Shadow Spear like being a lot cheaper like matters against a fairy. That's fair. Anyway, what does the community think on this one? They're in lockstep with us. And that will do it for artifact. We do have some land. We do have some lands coming up, some rare lands, and that's going to do it for our review. Coming up on the tail end, the almost exactly 4 hours, which is what we were kind of expecting. Do lands. Land. Labyrinth of Scophos. Interesting art. I like that art. There's a little complex maze there. Taps for a single colorless, and then 4 mana remove target attacking or blocking creature from combat.
Yeah, we've had this card before, right? Not by this name, but I think I remember this being a core set card, around like M11, 12, or 13. It seems kind of okay. Like there are some two-color decks, maybe monocolor decks that have a room for a little bit of utility in their lands. If you're playing 20 basics of a certain type, you can likely get away with having a couple lands that don't add of whatever color you're primarily interested in. Whether Labyrinth is gonna be good enough to make it in those spots, I'm not actually sure because it's competing with like Blast Zone potentially, Mobilized District, stuff like that. There actually are some perfectly fine colorless lands in the standard still.
Someone said Mystifying Maze. Is that the?
Yeah, I think that's the one. I think it's actually just the same card, even. Just like
I thought it was just attackers, which means I'm probably wrong here. 4 exile target attacking creature and opponent controls. Okay. Yeah, so this is attacking or blocking. Does that matter?
It could potentially. There are some combat tricks in standard, like Rimrock Knight. I guess Embercleave, if you're not dying to your opponent putting Embercleave on their creature, you could save your blocker if that ends up going very badly for you. But outside of a few specific red things, it seems.
I was thinking that if you removed your own blocking creature, that it's or I'm sorry, if you remove your own attacker, it's a lot like removing your opponent's blocker from combat. But if your attacking creature has trample, all of a sudden it just gets through.
Yeah, so that's actually pretty solid. Yeah, and there are a fair bit of trample in standard too, between like Questing Beast, Blacklands Paragon, anything with an Embercleave of your own.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Could be a one of and then like a 2-color aggro deck for sure, or a tutorable in a more dirtily shell. Next up, Temple of Abandon. Do we have all the temples here?
Yeah, I think it's. I don't know. We could kind of group the temples in terms of
temples together. I think.
One thing, like kind of a disclaimer towards that though, is I think it's pretty natural that the Esper colored temples are going to be better than like the Rakdos colored ones, because the Rakdos deck in standard right now is kind of caring about playing 12 1-drops, and Temple isn't necessarily great there. But if you're playing Esper Control, these Scrylands actually give you a lot more utility, because you can kind of play 3 Scrylands and combine them together to 1 spell worth of effect and be fine with your 27 lands.
Mm-hmm. I really like putting temples into play off of Growth Spiral, and we just got another Growth Spiral effect right in the Blue-Green Titan. Isn't that doing something similar?
Yeah, and the Dryad, the 2/4.
And the Dryad, yeah. It plays very well with these comes into play tap Scrylands. It helps you set up your next land drop if you're still like thirsty for more lands, and then if you're also playing a ramp deck, so maybe you like have enough of that already, and you just like really need to find Krasis as soon as possible, and the temples are going to help with that a lot. Mana bases weren't super good, like we were talking about Gruul, like having another dual land, even if it means you're skipping your 1-drop. Maybe that's just fine. Maybe it's just worth if the card's good enough.
Yeah, and I think people kind of underestimate the fact that temples function as 1-drops. If your deck doesn't really have more than 2 or 4 things to play on turn 1, temples are actually like pretty solid additions to your curve, and they also expand the range of keepable hands that you have. Right? Keeping like a 2-land hand on the draw that really hinges on casting a 3-drop on turn 3, that's a lot more palatable when at least one of those lands can give you an extra scry, an extra look to make sure your hand functions as intended. So I think these are, less good than maybe average standard, dual lands at rare, but I think they still have a time and a place, and at the very least, it's nice to kind of break the imbalance of, available dual lands.
I disagree with the sentiment that they might be good. I think they're like a little bit better than most rare duels we see in standard. They saw a ton of play last couple times around, and they're going to see a ton of play this time as well. They also show up in like modern every once in a while too. So I think these are going to see Pioneer play. I'm gonna give them 5. All format all star. Oh, they currently are seeing Pioneer play, right?
Yeah, I think I'd be willing to give a 4. Mostly because it's just like I think blue-white control. They'll see some play, but I just think that like that might be more of a symptom of the mana in Pioneer lacking like fast lands or creature lands. But Yeah, Pioneers Man is a whole other thing.
For sure. All right, that does it. This was a lot of fun, Darby. I'm glad we could do this
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, no, it was sweet. I think it's really kind of gives a lot of good context for where I want to start brewing. You know, with the early access event coming out tomorrow, you actually have a chance to watch a lot of your favorite streamers. I'm sure both of us included at the top of that list playing this the new cards all day tomorrow, and the set's actually dropping officially on Thursday too. So really good jump start to get the ball rolling. And I know I've got like 4 or 5 different brews that I've already kind of typed up on a extra screen here, just keeping these ideas
Absolutely.
down.
I got a few more ideas in terms of like early format brewing. Well, we should talk a little bit about like where how we think this set falls in comparison to other sets, like power level wise, and then also what we think the color that gained the most was. We talked about that a little bit in between rounds, but we should do like a final ranking. We can also both give our ranking there. Personally, I think this set it's like not as busted as Theros, right? Like Theros saw multiple cards banned. I don't think this set's gonna get multiple cards banned. If it ends up being if the Heliod plus Ballista combo ends up being too good for Pioneer, it's possible that they end up banning it in Pioneer or banning Ballista from Pioneer. But they're gonna let that actually play out first. It does take a lot of mana. It is easy to interact with. We'll see about that. Overall, should be a nice change of pace from Theros.
Yeah, I think if I had to rate the set's power level in comparison to the rest of Standard, it's definitely behind Eldraine, and I think, um, ahead of Guilds of Ravnica, Ravnica Allegiance, kind of on par with the core set. The only thing, like, core set had Field of Ruin, but I think for the rest of the cards available, I think Theros is going to be better than that.
Yeah, I meant Eldraine in my comment. My apologies. I said it'll be a nice break from Theros, but this is Theros. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the colors that are gaining the most. Let's see, where were our rankings?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable saying white is the biggest winner, just because I think Heliod is. I mean, if it's not the best card in the set, it's Uro maybe, but I think Heliod is still very good for his standard play, and I think Elspeth is the best planeswalker too. So white also it had the most that it needed to gain. I think it got it, and I would probably say like black is the next color, just based on the power of its rares. It actually had quite a few solid additions.
Yeah, I think my overall score for black was higher than my overall score for white. I'd given like a Dillick Tutor a 1, for example, and then I had a few 2s in white. Whereas I guess I had a few 2s in black as well. Yeah, so I think my average rating there was higher. I think there's also a few black cards that I rated for that I thought could be 5s. But I don't know. Maybe that's my own personal bias coming through. I do agree that those are the top 2 colors for sure. And then the other 3 colors both had these ones sprinkled around through them. They were like overall gaining less.
Yeah, I think quite a big drop off after the first two. Like looking at blue,
Mhm.
it's mostly just like Thassa and Thassa's Oracle that I want to play with. For red, it's almost just Phoenix of Ash is a card that I'm personally really excited to try. I do think that the sweeper Storm's Wrath is going to be a player. Someone smarter than me is probably going to find some way to break Ox in standard, but yeah, I think that's beyond that. It's gonna be cool because there are if devotion decks exist, these are gonna be completely new archetypes utilizing completely new cards. So Theros almost demands kind of innovation in the metagame with the way it sets up its mechanics.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. Do you have any final thoughts? I don't have any. I'll throw off a plug for my Twitch. I'm guessing most of y'all have seen it. It's twitch.tv/CalebdMTG. If you're into Magic, you should check it out. Wyatt Darby is Wyatt Darby MTG. Is that it? Is there any like anything?
Yeah, no, that's it. I'm Wyatt DMTG on Twitter because I don't like unifying my brand. That's too easy. Um, but yeah, I'll be doing some pretty intense standard streaming in the next couple days as this stuff comes out. And I think beyond that, I'm really excited to kind of hear the ideas from the community forward. I think that I don't know. Um, if people have deck lists, shoot them at me because I'm really interested in trying stuff out. This is kind of the Wild West times of standard where everything's possible. And yeah, I kind of want to get in the trenches.
Awesome. Well, hopefully some of you folks enjoyed this Tempo official Theros Beyond Death review, and that's going to wrap it up for us. Cheers, everyone.